There's nothing more heartbreaking than watching your child sleep in the backseat of your car because you can't afford rent. For Jace Tomlin, losing his wife to cancer was devastating enough, but losing their home 6 months later left him and his 10-year-old son Ollie with nowhere to turn. With $800 in his pocket, Jace made a desperate choice at a town auction. He bought a house that had been abandoned for 30 years. The neighbors called it cursed. The windows were boarded up and weeds covered the front steps. But when Jace and Ollie walked inside, they found something incredible. The house was perfectly preserved. Child's drawings hung on the walls. Toys sat waiting in corners. A diary lay open on a bedroom desk. It was like the family had just vanished one day, leaving everything behind. As father and son began cleaning their new home, they discovered the house held a secret that would change their lives forever. What had the previous family left behind that was worth more than Jace could ever imagine? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, Jace Tomlin had been a different man. He'd worn pressed shirts to his job at the county planning office, came home to the smell of Sarah's cooking, and helped 10-year-old Ollie with homework at their kitchen table. Their modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street had been filled with laughter, Sarah's terrible singing from the shower, and the comfortable chaos of a family that believed tomorrow would always come. Cancer changed everything with the efficiency of a winter storm. Sarah's diagnosis arrived in March, aggressive and unforgiving. By August, she was gone, taking with her not just Jace's heart, but their financial stability. The medical bills came in, Waves insurance covered some, but not the experimental treatments, not the private nurses, not the hope they'd purchased at $30,000 a month until their savings evaporated like morning dew. The foreclosure notice arrived 3 weeks after Sarah's funeral, while Jace was still finding her coffee cups in the sink and her bookmark in novels she'd never finish. He'd stared at the legal document, the words blurring through tears he thought he'd exhausted. Ollie had found him at the kitchen table at midnight, still holding the paper. "Dad," Ollie's voice had been small in the darkness. "Are we going to be okay?" Jace had pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of his hair still, using Sarah's strawberry shampoo because neither of them could bear to change it. "We'll figure it out, buddy." "We always do." But they hadn't figured it out. The house sold at auction for less than they owed. Jace's grief had affected his work performance, and the county's budget cuts gave them an easy excuse to let him go. By November, they were living in Jace's 15-year-old Honda Civic, moving between parking lots and trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Ollie had stopped talking much after they lost the house. The boy who once chatted about everything from baseball cards to why clouds moved had grown quiet and watchful. He did his homework by streetlight, showered at the community center, and never once complained. That silence worried Jace more than any tantrum would have. The Millbrook County Courthouse held auctions every third Thursday, selling properties for back taxes. Jace had been driving past when he saw the crowd gathering. Something desperate made him pull over and walk up the courthouse steps. He'd never attended an auction, but desperation makes teachers of us all. Most of the properties went for thousands, tens of thousands. Jace was about to leave when the auctioneer called out, "Next item, 1,247 Sycamore Street. Been sitting empty for 30 years. Sold as is. No inspections, no warranties. We'll start the bidding at $500. The crowd murmured and shifted. Someone in the back called out, "That's the ghost house. Nobody wants that place." An elderly woman near Jace shook her head. "Shame what happened to that family. Poor little girl." Jace found his hand rising. $500. The auctioneer looked surprised. "I have 500. Do I hear 6? Silence stretched across the courthouse steps. The November wind rattled the oak trees, sending brown leaves skittering across the pavement. Jace could feel eyes on him, could hear whispered conversations about the fool bidding on a cursed house. 600, came a voice from the crowd. Jace's heart hammered. 600 would leave him with $200 to his name. But Ollie needed a roof, needed an address for school, needed something stable in a world that had taken everything else away. 700, Jace called out. More silence. The other bidder shook his head and walked away. 800, Jace heard himself say, though no one had bid against him. The auctioneer banged his gavel. Sold to the gentleman in the blue jacket for $800. Later, driving through Millbrook's older neighborhoods with the deed in his glove compartment, Jace wondered what he'd done. Sycamore Street sat at the town's edge, where sidewalks gave way to gravel and streetlights grew sparse. The houses here had been built in the 60s and 70s, modest homes with generous yards where children had once played and gardens had flourished. Number 1247 stood apart from its neighbors, not just in its obvious abandonment, but in its design. Where other houses were simple ranches or split levels, this one rose 2 stories with a wraparound porch and gingerbread trim that spoke of an earlier era. Plywood covered the windows. Ivy climbed the walls with determined persistence. The front yard had surrendered to weeds and volunteer trees that created a natural barrier between the house and the street. Jace parked in the cracked driveway and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. Ollie stirred in the passenger seat, rubbing his eyes. "Are we here, Dad?" "Yeah, buddy. We're here." They approached the front porch together, stepping carefully around loose boards and trailing vines. The key from the courthouse fit perfectly in the original lock, which turned with surprising ease. The front door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the neighborhood. What they found inside defied every expectation Jace had formed during the drive over. The house wasn't destroyed. It wasn't empty. It was preserved. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the plywood, illuminating a living room that belonged to another decade. A floral sofa sat arranged with throw pillows that still held their shape. Magazines from 1993 lay fanned across a coffee table. National Geographic, Better Homes and Gardens, Scientific American. A child's sneakers sat by the door, small and white with rainbow laces, as if their owner had just stepped out of them. Jace and Ollie moved through the house with the reverence of visitors in a museum. The kitchen held dishes in the sink, a recipe box open to Emma's favorite chocolate chip cookies. The handwriting was neat, feminine, with little hearts dotting the eyes. A grocery list hung on the refrigerator, items like milk, bread, and birthday candles, written in the same careful script. Upstairs, they found 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom felt heavy with absence, a man's watch on the nightstand, a woman's reading glasses beside a bookmark in a romance novel. The second bedroom appeared to be an office, with filing cabinets and a desk covered in papers that Jace didn't feel right examining too closely. But it was the third bedroom that made Ollie gasp and Jace's breath catch in his throat. It was a child's room, but not like any child's room Jace had ever seen. The walls were covered with drawings, not the typical stick figures and crayon houses most kids created, but detailed sketches of machines, diagrams with labels and arrows, mathematical equations written in a surprisingly mature hand. A telescope sat by the window, still pointing toward the sky. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that seemed far too advanced for a child. Advanced physics, the chemistry of life, engineering principles. On the desk sat a framed school photograph of a girl who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. She had serious dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and a smile that seemed to hold secrets. A small placard at the bottom of the frame read, "Emma Hartwell, 6th grade, Millbrook Elementary." Ollie picked up the photograph with careful hands. "Dad, who is this?" Jace studied the picture, noting the intelligence in the girl's expression, the way she seemed to be looking directly at them across the decades. "I think this is who used to live here, buddy." Her name was Emma. Where did she go? It was the question that would haunt them both, the mystery that would transform their desperate search for shelter into something far more profound. Jace set the photograph back on the desk with the same care Ollie had shown. "I don't know yet, but maybe we can find out." As they explored the rest of Emma's room, Jace began to understand why the neighbors had called this place cursed, why it had sat empty for 30 years. It wasn't haunted by ghosts, it was haunted by the weight of interrupted dreams, by the sense that a remarkable life had been cut short before it could fulfill its promise. But for Jace and Ollie, standing in the golden afternoon light filtering through the covered windows, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like home had found them when they needed it most. Their first week in the house passed in a strange rhythm of discovery and domestication. Jace had managed to get the electricity turned on, though the water would take another few days. They used bottled water from the corner store and ate sandwiches by lamplight, feeling like pioneers in their own strange frontier. Ollie had claimed Emma's room as his own, but he'd been careful not to disturb anything. He slept on an air mattress on the floor while Emma's bed remained perfectly made, her stuffed animals arranged against the pillows. Each morning, Jace would find his son studying Emma's wall drawings with the intensity of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. "Dad, look at this one," Ollie said on Thursday morning, pointing to a detailed sketch near the window. "It's some kind of water cleaner. See these tubes and filters? And here," he traced his finger along penciled arrows, "dirty water goes in here, and clean water comes out here." Jace studied the drawing. Even to his untrained eye, it looked sophisticated, far beyond what he'd expect from a child. Mathematical formulas filled the margins, and the mechanical details showed an understanding of engineering principles that seemed impossible for someone Emma's age. "She was really smart, wasn't she?" Ollie asked. "She was extraordinary," Jace agreed. It was while cleaning out a closet in Emma's room that Jace made the discovery that would change everything. He'd been sorting through boxes of old clothes items that might be donated or discarded when his hand brushed against something hidden behind the hanging dresses. A wooden panel in the back wall moved slightly under pressure. Curious, Jace pushed harder. The panel slid sideways, revealing a hidden compartment just large enough to hold a single notebook. His hands trembled as he lifted it out, recognizing immediately that this was something Emma had deliberately concealed. The notebook was bound, in worn leather, its pages filled with Emma's careful handwriting. The first page bore the title, "My Scientific Journal, Private Property of Emma Catherine Hartwell." Below that, in smaller print, "If you are reading this and I am not here to give you permission, please be kind to my ideas. They are all I have to leave behind." Jace's throat tightened as he read those words. He called for Ollie, who came running up the stairs with the excitement of a boy who'd been waiting all week for something interesting to happen. Together, they sat on Emma's bed and opened the journal. What they found inside defied every assumption about childhood and genius that either of them had ever held. The journal contained over 200 pages of detailed scientific observations, invention sketches, and theoretical work that read like the notebooks of a graduate student. Emma had documented experiments in chemistry, physics, and engineering with the methodical precision of a trained researcher. Her handwriting grew more confident as the journal progressed, her ideas more complex and far-reaching. One section was devoted entirely to water purification systems. Emma had apparently become fascinated with the problem after a school presentation about children in developing countries who lacked access to clean drinking water. Her initial sketches were simple, but they evolved over dozens of pages into increasingly sophisticated designs. "Look at this," Jace whispered, turning to a page titled Solar-Powered Purification Unit, version 12. The drawing showed a compact device that could apparently purify contaminated water using nothing but sunlight and a series of innovative filters. The margins were filled with calculations about flow rates, filtration efficiency, and cost projections. "She wanted to help people," Ollie said quietly. "Kids like us, but in other countries." Jace turned the page and found something that made his heart skip. It was a letter, written in Emma's careful script and dated just 3 months before the family's disappearance. "Dear future me," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you survived to be at least 16, which would make me very happy. I wanted to write down everything I've learned about the water purifier in case something happens to me before I can finish it properly. Mom says I worry too much about grown-up things, but I know I'm different from other kids, and I don't think I'm going to have as much time as everyone else. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Emma's fears about her health, her frustration with adults who didn't take her ideas seriously, and her desperate hope that someone would someday continue her work. She wrote about feeling isolated from children her own age, about teachers who didn't know what to do with a student who had already surpassed their knowledge, about parents who loved her but couldn't understand the urgency she felt about her projects. I dream about the day when no child has to die from drinking dirty water, she wrote near the end. I know that sounds like something an adult would say, but I've seen the photographs in National Geographic, and I can't stop thinking about it. If I can't grow up to fix this problem myself, maybe someone else will find my work and make it real. Jace had to stop reading. The weight of Emma's words, the maturity of her concerns, the poignant hope in her writing it, all felt too heavy for the small bedroom where they sat, surrounded by the artifacts of her interrupted life. "Dad." Ollie's voice was small. "What happened to her?" Before Jace could answer, they heard a knock at the front door. It was their first visitor since moving in, and Jace felt oddly protective of Emma's secrets as he went downstairs to answer it. On the porch stood an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that reminded Jace immediately of Emma's school photograph. She carried a covered casserole dish and wore the expression of someone who had been debating this visit for days. "I'm Martha Kowalski," she said. "I live 3 houses down. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood, and I brought you some dinner." She paused, studying Jace's face. "I also wanted to talk to you about the house you've bought." Jace invited her in, grateful for adult conversation after a week of just him and Ollie. Martha set the casserole on the kitchen counter and looked around the preserved room with an expression of deep sadness. "I haven't been inside this house in 30 years, she said quietly. "It looks exactly the same." "You knew the family?" Jace asked. Martha nodded. "I was the children's librarian at Millbrook Public Library for 42 years. Emma Hartwell was one of my most devoted patrons. That child read everything we had on science and engineering, then started requesting books through interlibrary loan that most adults couldn't understand." She smiled at the memory. She'd come in every Tuesday after school, arms loaded with returned books, ready to check out another stack that was taller than she was. "What happened to them?" The question came from Ollie, who had appeared at the bottom of the stairs with Emma's journal clutched against his chest. Martha's expression grew heavy. "Oh, honey, it was such a tragedy. Emma got very sick, very suddenly. The doctors said it was a rare condition, something with her blood. She was in and out of the hospital for months, but she kept working on her projects even when she was too weak to walk." Jace felt the pieces clicking into place. "She died just 3 weeks before her 13th birthday, Martha confirmed. "Her parents were devastated. They couldn't bear to change anything in the house, couldn't bear to sell it or rent it out. They just locked the door and moved away. I heard they went to live with relatives in California, but they never came back." The 3 of them stood in the preserved kitchen, surrounded by the weight of that revelation. Emma hadn't disappeared mysteriously. She had simply run out of time, the way children sometimes do when the world moves too fast for small bodies to keep up. "She was special," Martha continued, "not just smart but kind. She used to help other children with their homework at the library, always patient, even when they couldn't keep up with her thinking. She talked about wanting to invent things that would help people, especially children who were suffering somewhere in the world." Ollie held up the journal. "We found this. She wrote about wanting to help kids who don't have clean water." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She talked about that project constantly in her final months. Even when she was so weak the doctors said she should be resting, she'd be at the library researching filtration systems and solar energy. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "I always wondered what happened to all her work." Jace looked at his son, at the elderly librarian, who had loved Emma like a granddaughter, at the kitchen where a brilliant child had sat doing homework that could have changed the world. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar coat. "Would you help us understand what she was working on?" he asked Martha. "Would you help us learn about Emma?" Martha smiled through her tears. "Honey, I thought you'd never ask." Martha became their guide into Emma's world. The next afternoon, she returned with a box of photocopied articles and a determined expression that reminded Jace of his late wife when Sarah had decided something needed to be accomplished. "I spent all night going through my files," Martha explained as they settled in the living room. "I kept everything related to Emma's library research. Call it a librarian's instinct, but I knew someday this information would matter." Ollie sat cross-legged on the floor, Emma's journal open in his lap. Over the past day, he'd become increasingly absorbed in trying to decode Emma's drawings and notes. Jace watched his son with a mixture of pride and concern. It was the most animated Ollie had been since Sarah's death, but there was something almost desperate in the way he clung to Emma's story. "Tell us about the music box," Martha said, pulling out a manila folder. "Did you find it yet?" Jace and Ollie exchanged glances. "What music box?" Martha smiled. "Emma mentioned it in one of our last conversations. She said she'd hidden something important inside a music box that her grandmother had given her. She was very secretive about it, said it was the key to understanding her most important work." They spent the next hour searching Emma's room systematically. Martha directed them with the patience of someone who had helped countless children find lost library books. Finally, Ollie discovered it behind a collection of stuffed animals on a high shelf, a wooden music box, carved with delicate roses and painted in soft pastels. The box was heavier than expected, its weight suggesting hidden complexity. When Jace lifted the lid, a gentle melody began to play, something classical that he didn't recognize, but that seemed to fill the room with the essence of childhood and lost innocence. "Pachelbel's Canon," Martha said softly. "Emma's favorite piece. She said it was mathematically perfect." But as they listened, Ollie's head tilted with the focused attention he'd inherited from his mother. "Dad, there's something wrong with the melody." "Wrong how?" "It's not playing the right notes. Listen." Ollie hummed along, his perfect pitch-catching discrepancies that the adults missed. "Some of the notes are different from the real song, and they're not random mistakes, they're deliberate." Martha leaned forward with excitement. Emma mentioned that she'd modified something to create a code. She was fascinated by the idea of hiding messages in plain sight. Over the next 2 hours, with Martha providing historical context and Ollie's musical ear identifying the altered notes, they began to crack Emma's cipher. She had changed specific notes in the melody to correspond to letters of the alphabet. When they transcribed the modified notes onto paper, a message emerged. "Look where the morning light touches the eastern wall at 8 o'clock on the 7th day after my birthday." Jace felt a chill of recognition. According to the dates in Emma's journal, her birthday had been October 15th. 7 days later would have been October 2021, just 2 weeks before the family's disappearance. "She knew," he said quietly. "She knew she was running out of time." The next Sunday morning found all 3 of them in Emma's room at 8 o'clock, watching as the autumn sun streamed through the single unboarded window. The light moved across the eastern wall like a golden spotlight, illuminating different sections of Emma's drawings as the minutes passed. At exactly 8:07, the sunlight fell on a sketch that looked different from the others. Where Emma's other drawings were done in pencil, this one included small marks in what appeared to be invisible ink marks that only became visible under direct sunlight. "Clever girl," Martha murmured as the hidden message revealed itself. It was a map of the house, showing the location of something marked with a star in the basement, behind the water heater. The basement had been one area of the house that Jace had avoided exploring. It felt too intrusive, too much like grave robbing. But Emma's elaborate cipher suggested she had wanted someone to find whatever she'd hidden there. The basement was exactly what Jace had expected: concrete floors, exposed beams, the musty smell of 30 years without proper ventilation. The water heater sat in the far corner, a cylindrical monument to 1,000 1980s engineering that somehow still functioned. Behind it, exactly where Emma's map indicated, they found a loose stone in the foundation wall. Jace worked it free with his hands, revealing a cavity just large enough to hold a metal document tube, the kind photographers used to protect negatives. Inside the tube were architectural drawings unlike anything in Emma's journal. These weren't sketches or ideas. They were professional, quality blueprints for a water purification system that looked decades ahead of its time. Every component was labeled, every measurement precise, every angle calculated to the degree. But more importantly, tucked between the blueprints, they found a partially completed patent application. Emma had been trying to protect her invention legally, to ensure that her ideas could benefit the world, even if she wasn't there to oversee their development. The patent application was written in the careful language of legal documents, though Emma's youth showed through in places where her natural enthusiasm overcame formal constraints. She described her invention as a solar-powered water purification system designed to provide safe drinking water for children in underserved communities worldwide. The technical specifications were staggering. Emma's system could purify contaminated water at a rate of 50 gallons per day, using nothing but sunlight and a series of innovative filters she had designed herself. The projected cost per unit was less than $200, making it affordable for deployment in developing nations. "This is revolutionary," Martha said, studying the blueprints with growing amazement. "I mean, I knew Emma was brilliant, but this could save millions of lives." Jace found himself thinking about the weight of what they'd discovered. Emma's invention wasn't just clever, it was genuinely world-changing. And she had died before she could share it with anyone who might have the resources to make it real. That evening, after Martha had gone home with promises to research the patent process, Jace and Ollie sat in Emma's room, surrounded by the evidence of her remarkable mind. The music box played its coded melody in the background, a soundtrack to their growing understanding of the girl who had lived here. "Dad," Ollie said quietly, "what are we supposed to do with all this?" It was the question that had been haunting Jace since they'd found the journal. Emma had left behind ideas that could change the world, but she'd left them in the hands of a grieving father and a 10-year-old boy who were just trying to survive their own losses. "I don't know yet, buddy," Jace admitted, "but I think Emma wanted someone to find her work. Maybe that someone is us." Ollie picked up Emma's school photograph, studying her serious expression and intelligent eyes. She was trying to help people, even though she was just a kid. She was trying to help people because she was a kid. Jace corrected gently. "Sometimes children see solutions that adults miss because they haven't learned yet that some problems are supposed to be impossible to solve." As they prepared for bed that night, both father and son felt the weight of Emma's legacy settling around them like a mantle. They had come to this house looking for shelter and had found instead a purpose neither of them had expected. The music box continued to play its secret melody, filling the darkness with the promise that some gifts are too precious to remain buried forever. Martha returned the following Tuesday with an armload of research materials and the focused determination of a woman on a mission. She'd spent 2 days at the county library, the university library in the next town, and on the phone with patent attorneys who specialized in intellectual property law. "The good news," she announced as they gathered around the kitchen table, "is that Emma's patent application was never filed. That means her ideas are still protected under what's called prior art laws, and we could potentially complete the application process on her behalf." Jace felt his heart racing. "What's the bad news?" "The bad news is that we need to prove the invention actually works. A patent isn't just about having a good idea. You have to demonstrate that the idea can be manufactured and will perform as promised." Ollie, who had been studying Emma's blueprints with increasing fascination, looked up from his careful examination of a filter design. "Could we build it? Could we actually make Emma's water cleaner?" Martha smiled at his enthusiasm. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd ask. I spoke with Dr. Patricia Chen at State University. She runs the environmental engineering department, and she's agreed to look at Emma's designs. If they're as revolutionary as they appear to be, she might be willing to help us create a prototype. The drive to State University took 45 minutes through countryside that reminded Jace of better times, when he and Sarah had taken weekend trips to explore small towns and antique shops. Ollie sat in the back seat with Emma's blueprints carefully protected in a portfolio Martha had provided, treating them with the reverence of a monk transporting sacred texts. Dr. Chen's laboratory occupied an entire floor of the engineering building, filled with sophisticated equipment that made Emma's bedroom workshop look primitive by comparison. But when Dr. Chen examined Emma's blueprints, her expression shifted from polite interest to genuine amazement. "Where did you say these designs came from?" she asked, studying the filtration schematics with growing excitement. "A 12-year-old girl named Emma Hartwell," Jace replied. "She died 30 years ago, before she could finish her work." Dr. Chen looked up sharply. "A 12-year-old designed this? That's impossible. This level of engineering sophistication, the understanding of fluid dynamics, solar energy conversion, molecular filtration, this represents years of graduate-level study." Martha pulled out Emma's school photograph. She was what we used to call a child prodigy, spent most of her free time at the library, reading scientific journals that most adults couldn't understand. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Chen examined every aspect of Emma's designs. She ran calculations, consulted reference materials, and made phone calls to colleagues who specialized in various aspects of water purification technology. "I need to be completely honest with you," she finally said. "These designs are not just viable, they're brilliant." Emma somehow intuited engineering principles that weren't even formally recognized until the late 1990s. Her solar energy conversion system is more efficient than anything currently on the market. Her filtration method combines multiple technologies in ways that no one has attempted. Jace felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. Pride for Emma's extraordinary gifts, sadness that the world had lost such a remarkable mind before it could flourish. "More importantly," Dr. Chen continued, "I believe we can build this. My graduate students and I have been working on similar problems for years, but we've never approached the solution from this angle. Emma's design is elegant in ways that our more conventional approaches aren't." Ollie leaned forward eagerly. "So it would really work? It would really clean dirty water?" "Not just clean it," Dr. Chen replied. "According to these specifications, Emma's system would purify water to a standard that exceeds most municipal treatment plants, and it would do it using nothing but sunlight and filters that could be manufactured for less than $50 each." The implications hit Jace like a physical force. Emma's invention wasn't just clever, it was the kind of breakthrough that could legitimately change the world. And somehow, through a combination of desperation and chance, he and Ollie had become the custodians of her legacy. "What would it take to build a prototype?" Martha asked, always the practical librarian. Dr. Chen consulted her notes. 3 months, maybe 4. I'd need to secure funding for materials and graduate assistant time, but this is exactly the kind of project that attracts grant money. There are foundations specifically devoted to developing clean water technology for underserved populations. As they drove home, Ollie was unusually quiet. Jace caught his eye in the rearview mirror and saw the thoughtful expression that meant his son was processing something important. "What's on your mind, buddy?" "I keep thinking about Emma," Ollie said. "She was our age when she figured all this out. She was just a kid, but she was trying to save people." Jace pulled over at a roadside park and turned to face his son. "Does that inspire you or worry you?" "Both, I guess. I mean, I'm 10 and I can barely figure out my math homework. But Emma was 12 and she invented something that could help millions of people." Ollie looked down at the portfolio containing Emma's blueprints. "What if I'm supposed to do something important too, but I'm not smart enough?" The question broke Jace's heart and filled it simultaneously. He got out of the car and sat on the picnic table where Ollie had moved to watch the clouds. "You know what I think made Emma special?" Jace said finally. "It wasn't just that she was smart. Lots of people are smart. What made Emma extraordinary was that she cared about people she'd never met, kids on the other side of the world who needed clean water. She used her gifts to try to help others. But I don't have gifts like that. Says who? Jace smiled at his son. You're the one who figured out that Emma's music box was playing the wrong notes. You're the one who noticed patterns in her drawings that Martha and I missed. You have your mother's heart and your own unique way of seeing the world. Ollie considered this. Do you think Mom would have liked Emma? The question caught Jace off guard, but as he thought about it, he realized the answer was obvious. She would have loved Emma. Your mom always said that the most beautiful thing about children was their natural desire to make the world better. That evening, back in Emma's room, they made a decision that would change everything. Martha had left them with contact information for several foundations that funded clean water initiatives, along with a stack of grant applications and legal forms. We're going to do this, Jace announced. We're going to make Emma's invention real. Ollie looked up from Emma's journal, which he'd been reading like a bedtime story. Even if it takes a long time, even if it takes years, Emma deserves to have her work shared with the world, and there are children out there who need what she created. As they prepared for bed, Jace realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt something that had been missing from their lives: purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were working towards something meaningful, something that connected them to the brilliant girl who had lived in this house and dreamed of changing the world. The music box played its coded melody one more time before Jace closed the lid, its secret message now decoded, but its promise just beginning to unfold. 3 weeks into their collaboration with Dr. Chen, Ollie made a discovery that changed their understanding of Emma's story completely. He'd been methodically examining every inch of Emma's room, treating it like an archaeological site where each artifact might reveal crucial information about the girl who had lived there. It was while investigating a loose floorboard near Emma's desk that he found a collection of letters hidden in a small space between the joists. Unlike Emma's scientific journal, these letters were deeply personal, written in the voice of a lonely child, trying to make sense of a world that moved too fast for her extraordinary mind. Dear future Emma, the first letter began, dated 2 years before her death. I am writing this on my 10th birthday. Everyone gave me toys, but what I really wanted was someone to understand why I spend so much time thinking about problems that grown-ups say I'm too young to worry about. Jace read the letters aloud to Martha and Ollie that evening, his voice catching on passages that revealed Emma's profound isolation, despite her loving parents and comfortable home. The other kids at school think I'm weird because I read science books during recess, one letter continued. Mrs. Patterson, my teacher, keeps telling my parents that I need to act more like a normal child, but I don't know how to stop my brain from working the way it does. When I see pictures of children in other countries who are sick from dirty water, I can't stop thinking about it until I figure out how to help them. Another letter, written just months before her death, revealed the weight of Emma's growing awareness of her own mortality. Dear future Emma, if you exist, I went to the doctor again today. Mom and Dad think I don't understand what the doctors are saying, but I do. I understand everything, and I know that I might not get to grow up the way other kids do. That's why I'm working so hard on the water purifier. If I can't live long enough to help people myself, maybe I can leave behind something that will help them after I'm gone. The letters painted a picture of a child who carried the concerns of the world on her shoulders, who felt responsible for solving problems that had challenged humanity for generations. But they also revealed Emma's deep capacity for love and her desperate wish for connection. Sometimes I pretend that someday a family will move into our house and find all my work, she wrote in one of her final letters. I pretend that they'll understand what I was trying to do and that they'll help me finish it. I know that's probably silly, but it makes me feel less alone when I'm working late at night on my projects. Ollie looked up from the letter with tears in his eyes. Dad, she was writing to us. She knew we would come. Martha wiped her own eyes with a tissue. Children like Emma often have an intuitive understanding of things that adults miss. Maybe she did know, in some way, that her work would find the right people. The letters also provided crucial information about Emma's invention process. She described experiments conducted in secret, materials purchased with birthday money, and the growing urgency she felt as her health declined. Most importantly, she mentioned additional prototypes hidden in various locations around the house. "I built 3 different versions of the water purifier," one letter explained. "The first one is in my bedroom closet, behind the loose board. The second one is in the basement, next to my chemistry set. The third one is in the attic, inside an old suitcase. I wanted to make sure that if something happened to one of them, the others would survive." The hunt for Emma's prototypes became a family project that brought Martha, Jace, and Ollie together in ways that reminded Jace of better times. Martha approached it with a librarian's systematic methodology. Jace contributed his practical problem-solving skills, and Ollie provided the intuitive leap that often led them to exactly the right place. They found the first prototype exactly where Emma had described: shoebox-sized device constructed from PVC pipes, solar cells salvaged from a broken calculator, and filters that appeared to be made from household materials but showed sophisticated understanding of molecular science. The basement prototype was more advanced, clearly representing months of refinement and improvement. Emma had somehow acquired professional-grade components, precision filters, high-efficiency solar panels, electronic monitoring systems that could have come from a commercial laboratory. How did a 12-year-old get access to this equipment? Dr. Chen wondered when they brought the prototypes to her laboratory for analysis. Martha had the answer. "Emma's uncle worked for a water treatment company. I remember her mentioning that he would bring her samples of different filtration materials. He probably had no idea she was using them to build functional prototypes. But it was the third prototype, hidden in the attic suitcase, that took everyone's breath away. This wasn't a child's experiment or even an advanced student project. It was a fully functional water purification system that looked like it could have been manufactured commercially. "This is impossible," Dr. Chen muttered as she examined the device. "The engineering tolerances, the component integration, the efficiency calculations, this represents a level of sophistication that most of my graduate students couldn't achieve." The attic prototype came with its own documentation, detailed test results, showing that Emma had purified water from the polluted creek behind her house, water from the municipal supply system, and even samples that she'd deliberately contaminated to test her system's limits. Every test showed the same result. Emma's invention produced water that exceeded all federal purity standards while using less energy than any existing system. "She really did it," Ollie whispered, staring at the test results. "She really solved the problem." But perhaps the most moving discovery in the attic was a final letter, sealed in an envelope marked, "For whoever finds my work." "If you are reading this," Emma had written, "it means that I didn't get to finish what I started. That makes me sad, but not as sad as you might think. I always knew that the most important inventions belong to everyone, not just to the people who create them." The letter continued, "I hope that whoever finds my water purifier will make it available to children who need clean water to survive. I hope they will remember that behind every invention is someone who cared enough about other people to spend their time trying to solve problems instead of just worrying about them." Emma ended with a request that broke everyone's heart. "If you use my invention to help people, please tell them that it came from a girl who wanted to make sure that no child ever died from something as simple as dirty water. Tell them that love can survive, even when the person who felt it cannot." That night, as they sat in Emma's room, surrounded by the evidence of her remarkable life, Martha made an observation that would stay with all of them. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about what made Emma so special. It wasn't just her intelligence, though she was certainly brilliant. It was her empathy. She could imagine the suffering of children she'd never met, in places she'd never been, and that imagination drove her to work harder than any adult I've ever known." Jace looked at his son, who had spent the day carefully cataloguing Emma's prototypes with the same attention to detail that Emma herself had shown. "I think Emma's greatest invention wasn't the water purifier," he said. "I think it was the example she set, showing us that age doesn't matter when it comes to caring about others, that the best reason to use our gifts is to help people we'll never meet." As they prepared for bed, Ollie asked the question that had been haunting all of them. What happens now? What do we do with everything Emma left behind? Jace tucked the letters back into their hiding place with the same care that Emma had shown when she'd placed them there 3 decades earlier. "Now, we keep the promise she asked us to make. We make sure her work reaches the children who need it." Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of the house that had sheltered Emma's dreams and now sheltered theirs. Inside, 3 people who had started as strangers were becoming a family united by the legacy of a girl whose greatest wish was simply to help others survive. The discovery that would unlock Emma's greatest secret came from the most mundane of sources. Ollie's natural curiosity about a jewelry box that sat on Emma's dresser, seemingly ordinary among her collection of scientific instruments and books. The jewelry box was carved from dark wood and inlaid with mother-of-pearl butterflies. It seemed out of place among Emma's technical possessions, more suited to a girl who collected dolls than one who designed water purification systems. But Ollie had learned that nothing in Emma's room was quite what it appeared to be. "There's something weird about this box," he told Jace one Saturday morning as they cleaned Emma's room together. "It's too heavy for jewelry, and listen." He shook it gently, producing a metallic rattle that didn't sound like rings or necklaces. When they opened the box, they found typical childhood treasures: few pieces of costume jewelry, some hair ribbons, a small collection of interesting rocks. But tucked beneath the red velvet lining was something that made Jace's heart skip: a small brass key attached to a ribbon with a note in Emma's handwriting. "The key to understanding everything is usually hidden in plain sight," the note read. "Look for the door that doesn't look like a door." The search for Emma's hidden door became an obsession that consumed their weekend. Martha joined them, bringing the systematic approach that had made her an excellent librarian. They examined every wall, every closet, every piece of furniture that might conceal a hidden entrance. It was Ollie who finally solved the puzzle, applying the same pattern recognition skills that had helped him decode Emma's music box cipher. He noticed that one section of basement wall was covered with wood paneling, while the rest was exposed, stoner detail that adult eyes had dismissed as typical basement renovation. "Dad, why would someone panel just this one section?" he asked, running his hands along the wood grain. "And look, these aren't real boards. They're painted to look like wood, but they're actually one big piece." The brass key fit perfectly into a lock, hidden behind a fake electrical outlet. When Jace turned it, they heard the soft click of a mechanism engaging, and the entire paneled section swung inward like a door. What they found beyond that door defied every assumption they'd made about Emma's capabilities. It was a laboratory, not a child's science corner, but a genuine research facility that would have impressed professional engineers. Emma had somehow converted a section of the basement into a workspace equipped with microscopes, chemical analysis equipment, precision measuring tools, and testing apparatus that must have cost thousands of dollars. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with prototypes in various stages of completion. Emma had built dozens of devices, not just water purifiers, but air filters, solar panels, chemical testing kits, and machines whose purposes weren't immediately obvious. Each prototype was labeled with careful documentation describing its function, its testing results, and its potential applications. "My God," Martha whispered, moving through the laboratory like a visitor in a shrine. "She built all of this herself?" The centerpiece of the laboratory was a complete water purification system, not a prototype, but a finished product that looked ready for commercial manufacturing. This wasn't the experimental device they'd found in the attic. This was Emma's final design, incorporating every lesson she'd learned from her earlier attempts. Dr. Chen, when they brought her to see the laboratory the following week, stood speechless for several minutes before finding her voice. "This is graduate-level work," she finally said. "This is beyond graduate-level work. Some of these innovations," she picked up a filtration component that seemed impossibly compact for its complexity. I've never seen anything like this. Emma wasn't just copying existing technology, she was inventing entirely new approaches to problems that have challenged scientists for decades. But the most remarkable discovery in Emma's laboratory wasn't any single invention, it was her documentation system. Emma had kept meticulous records of every experiment, every failure, every breakthrough. Her laboratory notebooks read like the research journals of a seasoned scientist, complete with hypotheses, methodologies, statistical analysis, and peer review protocols. "Look at this," Dr. Chen said, opening one of Emma's later notebooks. "She's conducting double-blind testing on her own inventions. She's calculating confidence intervals. She's following research protocols that most professionals don't even know about." Emma's final notebook, dated just weeks before her death, contained entries that revealed both her extraordinary scientific maturity and her childlike hope for the future. "I know I'm running out of time," one entry began, "but I think I've finally perfected the water purifier design. The latest tests show 99.97% contaminant removal, energy efficiency that exceeds anything currently available, and manufacturing costs low enough to make the system affordable in developing nations." She continued, "I've been thinking about what happens to all this work if I don't get better. Mom and Dad love me, but they don't understand what I've been doing down here. They think it's just a hobby, something to keep me busy while I'm sick. They don't realize that these inventions could actually save lives." The final entry in Emma's notebook was dated 3 days before the family's departure from the house. "I've decided to leave everything exactly as it is. If something happens to me, maybe someday the right person will find this laboratory and understand what I was trying to accomplish. I've written instructions for manufacturing the water purifier and hidden them in the place where they'll be safest. Whoever finds my work, please remember that every invention represents hours I could have spent feeling sorry for myself, but chose instead to spend trying to help other people." That evening, as they sat in Emma's preserved bedroom, Jace realized that their small family had been entrusted with something far more significant than they'd initially understood. Emma hadn't just left behind a clever inventions, she'd left behind a complete research program that could revolutionize clean water technology for millions of people. "The responsibility is enormous," he said to Martha and Ollie. "What if we make the wrong decisions? What if we can't live up to what Emma wanted to accomplish?" Martha, who had been quietly contemplating the implications of their discovery, offered the wisdom that comes from decades of helping people find answers to difficult questions. "Emma didn't leave her work to perfect people," she said. "She left it to people who cared enough to look for it, to understand its value, and to honor her memory by sharing it with the world. That's us, imperfect as we are." Ollie, who had been studying photographs of Emma's various prototypes, looked up with the kind of insight that reminded Jace daily of Sarah's intuitive wisdom. "I think Emma knew we would find her laboratory," he said. "I think she knew that someone like us people who needed help themselves would be the ones to understand why her inventions mattered so much." As they prepared to leave Emma's laboratory that night, carefully locking the door and returning the key to its hiding place in the jewelry box, they each understood that their lives had been permanently changed by a 12-year-old girl who had believed that love could survive even when the person who felt it could not. The laboratory hummed quietly in the darkness, Emma's inventions waiting patiently for the day when they would finally reach the children they had been designed to save. The revelation that would change everything came not from Emma's hidden laboratory or her scientific journals, but from a manila envelope that Martha discovered while researching Emma's family history at the county courthouse. "I wanted to find out more about Emma's parents," Martha explained when she arrived at the house the following Tuesday, her arms full of photocopied documents. "I thought it might help us understand how to honor Emma's memory properly if we knew more about the people who raised such an extraordinary child." What Martha had found among the public records was a file that painted a picture of a family struggling with circumstances far more complex than anyone had imagined. "Jace, Ollie," Martha said, her voice heavy with the weight of discovery. I need to tell you something about Emma that changes everything we thought we knew about her story. They gathered in the living room, surrounded by the familiar artifacts of Emma's preserved childhood. But as Martha opened the manila envelope, the atmosphere in the room shifted from warm nostalgia to something far more profound. Emma didn't just die from a rare disease, Martha began, pulling out a stack of medical records that had been filed as part of the family's insurance claim. She died from juvenile myeloid leukemia, particularly aggressive form of blood cancer that primarily affects children between the ages of 10 and 15. Jace felt his stomach tighten. He knew enough about childhood leukemia to understand the implications. The medical records show that Emma was diagnosed when she was 11, Martha continued. But here's what's remarkable and heartbreaking. Emma knew her diagnosis. She understood her prognosis, and she made a conscious decision to spend what time she had left working on inventions that could help other children survive illnesses she knew she couldn't beat herself. Martha pulled out a letter written by Emma's oncologist to her parents, dated 6 months before Emma's death. Emma is an extraordinary patient, the letter read. Despite her youth, she has demonstrated an understanding of her condition that exceeds that of most adult patients. She has specifically requested that her treatment schedule be arranged to allow her maximum time for what she calls her work. While we typically encourage children to focus on normal childhood activities during treatment, Emma's dedication to her scientific projects appears to be providing her with a sense of purpose that may be contributing to her psychological resilience. The letter continued with details that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Emma has informed me that she is working on inventions designed to help children in developing countries who lack access to clean water and medical care. She has asked me to help her understand the medical challenges faced by children with waterborne illnesses, saying that she wants to make sure her inventions address real problems rather than theoretical ones. I have never encountered a child patient with such mature awareness of global health issues. But it was the next document that revealed the true scope of Emma's extraordinary courage. Martha pulled out a handwritten letter from Emma to her parents, found among her father's papers after his death several years earlier. "My dear Mom and Dad," the letter began, "I know you think I don't understand what's happening to me, but I do. I know that I have leukemia, and I know that the treatments aren't working the way the doctors hoped they would." Emma's letter continued with the wisdom of someone far older than her 12 years. "I'm not scared of dying, but I am scared of dying without leaving something useful behind. I've been reading about children in other countries who die from dirty water, and I realize that maybe I can help them even if I can't help myself. If I can invent a way to clean water that's simple and cheap enough for poor families to use, then maybe my life will have mattered for something important." The final paragraph of Emma's letter revealed the full depth of her sacrifice. "I know you want me to spend more time just being a kid, playing with friends and watching movies and doing normal things. But normal things feel empty when I know that other children are dying from problems I might be able to solve. Please let me keep working on my inventions. It's the only way I can feel like I'm fighting back against the unfairness of being sick." Martha wiped her eyes before continuing. "There's more. Emma's medical records show that she refused several treatment options that might have extended her life because they would have interfered with her cognitive abilities. She chose to remain clear-headed so she could continue working, even though it meant accepting a shorter survival time. The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Emma hadn't been a child prodigy who happened to get sick. She had been a dying child who chose to spend her final months trying to save other children rather than extending her own life. "She gave up time," Ollie said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "She gave up her own time so she could help kids she would never meet." Martha nodded. "But there's something else, something that makes Emma's story even more remarkable." She pulled out a final documenter video cassette tape labeled "For Emma's Future Family" in careful handwriting. Emma's mother left this with their attorney before the family moved to California, Martha explained. The instructions were that it should be given to whoever eventually bought the house, but only if they seemed to genuinely care about Emma's memory. Martha had brought a small television and VCR from her own house. As she inserted the tape, the room filled with the soft static of analog recording. Then Emma's face appeared on the screen, not the serious school photograph they'd grown familiar with, but a living, breathing child with bright eyes and a gentle smile. "Hi," Emma said, her voice clear despite the obvious fatigue in her face. "If you're watching this, it means that someone special has moved into my house and found my work. My mum said she would make sure this tape got to the right people, and I trust her to know who that would be." Emma continued, speaking directly to them across 3 decades with the calm confidence of someone who had made peace with her fate. "I want you to know that everything I invented for you. Not for you specifically, because I don't know who you are, but for people like you, people who care about helping others, people who understand that the best reason to use your brain is to make life better for someone else." The video showed Emma in her hidden laboratory, demonstrating her water purification system with the expertise of a seasoned engineer. "I hope my inventions help children who need clean water," she said. "But more than that, I hope they help you understand that being sick doesn't mean being helpless. Some of the most important work in the world gets done by people who don't have very much time to do it." Emma's final message was addressed directly to any children who might find her work. "If there are kids watching this, I want you to know that age doesn't matter when it comes to making a difference. I was 12 when I figured out how to clean dirty water, and you might be even younger when you figure out how to solve a problem that adults have been struggling with for years. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too young to change the world." As the video ended with Emma waving goodbye, the 3 people sitting in her preserved living room understood that they had been chosen not just to preserve her memory, but to complete a mission that she had begun, with the full knowledge that she wouldn't live to see its conclusion. The house around them felt different, now not just a shelter they had stumbled into, but a sacred space where a dying child had worked to save other children's lives. Emma's inventions weren't just clever devices, they were love letters to a future she would never see, written in the language of science and sealed with the sacrifice of her remaining time. "What do we do now?" Jace asked, though he already knew the answer. "Now we keep the promise she made to children she would never meet," Martha replied. "We make sure Emma's love reaches everyone it was intended to reach." Emma's video message changed everything. What had begun as a quest to understand the mysterious girl who had lived in their house became a sacred mission to fulfill the dying wish of a child who had sacrificed her own time to save others. Dr. Chen arrived the next morning with a team of graduate students and enough equipment to conduct a comprehensive analysis of Emma's final prototype. The basement laboratory, which had remained Emma's secret for 30 years, suddenly bustled with the focused energy of scientists who recognized they were in the presence of something extraordinary. "I've been awake all night thinking about this," Dr. Chen told Jace as her students set up testing apparatus around Emma's water purification system. "If Emma's invention performs as well as her documentation suggests, we're not just looking at a clever device, we're looking at technology that could legitimately save millions of lives." The testing process took 3 days. Emma's prototype was subjected to every challenge that Dr. Chen's team could devise. They fed it water contaminated with bacteria, viruses, heavy metals, and chemical pollutants. They tested its efficiency under different weather conditions, with varying levels of sunlight, and with the kind of field conditions it would encounter in developing nations. Emma's invention passed every test. "The purification rate exceeds anything currently available," Dr. Chen announced as she reviewed the final results. "The energy efficiency is revolutionary. The manufacturing cost projections are accurate. Emma didn't just design a water purifier, she solved problems that major corporations have spent billions of dollars trying to address." But more than the technical specifications, it was Emma's thoughtful design choices that impressed the professional engineers. She had anticipated every challenge that users in remote locations might encounter, creating solutions for maintenance, repair, and replacement that could be handled by people with no technical training. "She designed this for love," one of Dr. Chen's graduate students observed. Every component reflects an understanding not just of engineering principles, but of human needs. She thought about the mothers who would use this device, the children who would drink the water it produced, the communities that would benefit from its presence. With the testing complete, the next step was to approach organizations that could bring Emma's invention to the world. Martha had compiled a list of foundations, NGOs, and companies that specialized in clean water initiatives. Dr. Chen had reached out to colleagues at other universities who might provide additional validation and support. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Gates Foundation requested a full technical briefing. UNICEF wanted to discuss pilot programs in 3 African nations. The World Health Organization asked for detailed manufacturing specifications. Companies that specialized in humanitarian technology began competing for the opportunity to license Emma's design. "We need to be very careful about how we handle this," Martha warned during one of their evening planning sessions in Emma's room. Emma's invention could be worth millions of dollars in patent licensing fees. "We need to make sure that any money generated goes toward the purposes Emma intended." Jace had been thinking about this constantly. The financial implications of Emma's invention were staggering, not just for humanitarian organizations, but potentially for his own family. The patent licensing fees alone could provide financial security for Ollie's entire education and future. But every time he considered the money, he remembered Emma's video message and her letters to her future self. Emma hadn't invented the water purifier to create wealth. She had invented it to save children's lives. Any financial gain had to serve that primary purpose. "I think we need to establish a foundation," Jace announced. "Something that ensures Emma gets full credit for her invention, that directs any profits toward clean water initiatives, and that continues her work of supporting young inventors who want to help others." Ollie, who had been quietly drawing in one of Emma's sketchbooks, looked up with an idea that would prove to be the key to everything. "What if we make a video like Emma did?" he suggested. "What if we tell people Emma's story so they understand that the water purifier isn't just a machine eats, a gift from a kid who cared more about helping others than about living longer herself?" The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Emma's story was as powerful as her invention, and together they created a narrative that could inspire support for clean water initiatives worldwide. Martha contacted a local television producer who specialized in human interest stories. When the producer heard Emma's story and saw her laboratory, she immediately understood that this was more than just a news story. It was the kind of narrative that could change the way people thought about childhood, illness, and the power of love to transcend death. The filming took place over a week, with careful attention to preserving the dignity of Emma's memory while sharing the full scope of her extraordinary life. They interviewed Dr. Chen about the technical innovations Emma had achieved. They spoke with representatives from humanitarian organizations about the global need for affordable water purification technology. They filmed Ollie and Jace in Emma's laboratory, surrounded by the inventions she had created while fighting for her life. But the most powerful moment came when they played Emma's own video message, letting her speak for herself about her motivations and her hopes for the future. "This isn't just about technology," the producer said as she reviewed the footage. "This is about the triumph of love over despair, about a child who chose to spend her final months creating rather than complaining, about the way extraordinary courage can emerge from ordinary-looking people." As the documentary neared completion, Jace realized that his family had been transformed by their connection to Emma's story. Ollie had found his voice and his purpose, channeling his grief over losing his mother into determination to honor Emma's memory. Martha had discovered a new chapter of meaning in her retirement, becoming the guardian of Emma's legacy and an advocate for young inventors everywhere. And Jace himself had learned that healing sometimes comes not from forgetting loss, but from transforming it into service to others. The night before the documentary was scheduled to air nationally, they held a private screening in Emma's living room. As they watched Emma's story unfold on screen, as they heard her own words explaining her inventions and her dreams, they understood that they had become part of something far larger than their own survival. She knew Ollie said quietly as the documentary ended. Emma knew that someday people would understand what she was trying to do. Martha nodded, wiping away tears she had shed many times over the past months. She also knew that the right people would find her work and carry it forward. She trusted in the future even when she couldn't be part of it. Jace looked around the room where Emma had lived and dreamed and worked, where she had chosen love over self-pity and service over despair. Tomorrow, her story would reach millions of people. Her invention would begin its journey to the children who needed it most. Her example would inspire other young people to believe that age is no barrier to making a difference in the world. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of the house that had saved them all, three people who had started as strangers sat together as family, united by the legacy of a girl who had believed that love could survive even when the person who felt it could not. Outside, the winter wind rattled the windows, but inside, Emma's spirit filled every corner with the warmth of a life lived in service to others, a gift that would keep giving long after the giver had been called home. The documentary aired on a Tuesday evening in February, exactly 4 months after Jace and Ollie had first walked through the doors of 1247 Sycamore Street. What happened next exceeded every expectation they had dared to form. Within hours of the broadcast, the phone calls began. Not just from journalists and television producers, but from engineers who wanted to help manufacture Emma's invention, from humanitarian organizations ready to fund pilot programs, and from families whose own children had been inspired by Emma's example. Dr. Chen called at midnight, her voice trembling with excitement. "Jace, you need to know what's happening. I've been in touch with colleagues around the world, and the response to Emma's invention is unprecedented. The World Health Organization wants to fast-track approval for field testing. 3 major manufacturing companies are competing to produce the units at cost. The Gates Foundation is talking about funding 1 million units for immediate deployment." But it was Martha who delivered the news that changed everything. "The patent office called," she announced the next morning, her hands shaking as she held the phone. "Emma's patent application has been expedited for approval. Once it's finalized, every water purification unit manufactured using her design will bear her name and generate licensing fees for the foundation we're establishing. The Emma Hartwell Foundation, as they had decided to call it, would receive funding not just from patent licensing, but from donations inspired by Emma's story." Within a week of the documentary's airing, contributions had exceeded $50,000 from viewers who wanted to support clean water initiatives in Emma's memory. Ollie had become the unofficial spokesperson for Emma's legacy, his natural eloquence and genuine emotion making him the perfect ambassador for her story. When reporters asked him what Emma would think about the response to her invention, his answer always brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I think she would be happy that people understand why she worked so hard," he would say. "She didn't want to be famous, just wanted kids to have clean water. Now they will, because of what she invented when she was just 12 years old." The technical validation came from sources that carried weight throughout the scientific community. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology requested Emma's original prototypes for permanent display in their Museum of Innovation. The Smithsonian wanted to create an exhibit about child inventors, with Emma's story as the centerpiece. Most importantly, field tests began in 3 locations where clean water access was critically needed. Engineers traveled to rural villages in Kenya, Guatemala, and Bangladesh, carrying Emma's water purification units and the hope that her invention would perform in real-world conditions as brilliantly as it had in laboratory testing. The results exceeded every projection Emma had made in her notebooks. "The units are working perfectly," reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the engineer overseeing the Kenya deployment. "Local families can operate them with minimal training. The maintenance requirements are exactly what Emma projected. Most importantly, the water quality tests show purification levels that exceed international standards. But it was the human impact that truly validated Emma's vision. In Guatemala, a village that had lost 3 children to waterborne illness in the previous year, reported 0 cases of water-related sickness in the 2 months following deployment of Emma's system. In Bangladesh, a school that had been forced to close regularly due to contaminated water supplies was able to maintain full attendance for the first time in years. The photographs that came back from the field deployments showed something that even Emma's extensive planning hadn't fully anticipated. The units weren't just providing clean water, they were bringing communities together. Families gathered around the purification systems, children helped with maintenance, and the devices became focal points for community pride and cooperation. Emma designed more than a machine, observed Dr. Chen, as she studied reports from all 3 deployment sites. She designed a tool for community building. The units required just enough cooperation and maintenance to give people ownership over their clean water supply without being so complex that they become burdensome. The patent approval came through on a Friday afternoon in March, exactly 6 months after Jace had bought the house for $800. Martha called from the courthouse where she had been monitoring the paperwork, her voice filled with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. "It's official," she announced. "Emma Catherine Hartwell is now the youngest person ever to receive a posthumous patent for a humanitarian technology invention. Every unit manufactured will bear her name, and the licensing fees will fund clean water projects worldwide through the Emma Hartwell Foundation." That evening, as they celebrated in Emma's preserved dining room, Jace realized that his family had been transformed by their connection to her story. Ollie had found his voice and his purpose, speaking about Emma's work with the passion of someone who understood that age is no barrier to making a difference. Martha had discovered a new chapter of meaning in her life, becoming an advocate for young inventors and the guardian of Emma's legacy. And Jace himself had learned that healing comes not from forgetting loss, but from transforming it into service to others. Sarah's death had broken his heart, but Emma's example had shown him how to use that brokenness to understand the suffering of others and work to alleviate it. The financial projections for the Emma Hartwell Foundation were staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that patent licensing fees alone would generate over $2 million annually, with deployment funding from major humanitarian organizations potentially reaching 10 times that amount. But more than the money, it was the knowledge that Emma's invention would save lives that filled their house with a sense of completion. Somewhere in the world, children were drinking clean water because of the work a 12-year-old girl had done while fighting for her own life. Parents would not lose their children to preventable illnesses because Emma had chosen to spend her final months inventing rather than grieving. As they prepared for bed that night, Ollie asked the question that had been haunting all of them since the patent approval. "Do you think Emma knows?" he asked. "Do you think she knows that her invention is helping kids?" Jace looked around the dining room, where Emma had once sat doing homework that would change the world, where her parents had watched their brilliant daughter work with the intensity of someone who knew time was running out. "I think Emma always knew," he replied. "I think she knew that love finds a way to survive, even when the person who felt it cannot." The ceremony took place on a warm Saturday morning in May, exactly 1 year after Jace and Ollie had first walked through Emma's front door. The town of Millbrook had chosen to honor Emma's legacy with a memorial plaque in the town square. But what had started as a simple dedication had grown into something far more significant. Over 300 people gathered in the square that morning, not just local residents, but representatives from humanitarian organizations, scientists who had studied Emma's work, families whose children had benefited from her invention, and young inventors who had been inspired by her example. The bronze plaque, mounted on a granite stone near the town's old fountain, bore Emma's photograph and an inscription that captured the essence of her extraordinary life. Emma Catherine Hartwell, 1980. 1993, child inventor and humanitarian. Her water purification system has provided clean drinking water to over 100 children worldwide. She believed that love could survive even when the person who felt it could not. Her example proves that age is no barrier to changing the world. But it was the speeches that day that truly honored Emma's memory. Dr. Chen spoke about the technical brilliance of Emma's inventions, explaining to the crowd how a 12-year-old girl had solved engineering problems that had challenged professionals for decades. Martha shared stories about Emma's regular visits to the library, her insatiable curiosity, and her determination to use her intelligence in service of others. Representatives from UNICEF and the World Health Organization provided updates on the global deployment of Emma's water purification systems. In the years since the documentary had aired, over 0 units had been manufactured and distributed to communities in 37 countries. The technology that Emma had perfected in her basement laboratory was now saving lives on 6 continents. But it was Ollie's speech that brought tears to every eye in the crowd. "A year ago, my dad and I had lost everything," he began, his voice clear and confident despite his young age. "We were sleeping in our car, and I thought our lives were over. Then we found Emma's house, and we found Emma's story, and we learned something important. Sometimes when you think you've lost everything, you're actually in the exact right place to find what you're supposed to do with your life." Ollie continued, speaking directly to the children in the audience. "Emma was only 12 when she invented something that's now helping kids all over the world have clean water. She was sick, and she knew she didn't have very long to live, but instead of feeling sorry for herself, she spent her time trying to help other people. That's the most grown-up thing anyone can do, no matter how old they are." He concluded with words that would be quoted in newspapers and remembered long after the ceremony ended. "Emma taught us that you don't have to be big to make a big difference. You don't have to be old to do important work. You just have to care about other people more than you care about yourself. If a sick 12-year-old girl could change the world, then any of us can." After the formal ceremony, people lingered in the square, sharing stories about Emma's impact on their lives. Parents spoke about children who had been inspired to pursue science after hearing Emma's story. Teachers described students who had started their own invention projects, determined to follow Emma's example of using their talents to help others. But perhaps the most moving moment came when a family from Kenya approached Jace and Ollie with a photograph. It showed their 8-year-old daughter standing beside one of Emma's water purification units, holding a glass of clean water and smiling with the joy of a child who understood she was safe. "This is our daughter, Amara," the father explained through tears. 2 years ago, she almost died from drinking contaminated water. Now, because of Emma's invention, she is healthy and strong. We wanted you to know that Emma's love reached our family, even though our daughter will never meet the girl who saved her life." The photograph joined the collection that had been growing on Emma's bedroom wall images sent from around the world by families whose children had benefited from her invention. Each photograph represented lives saved, communities strengthened, and hope restored in places where clean water had once seemed impossible to obtain. That evening, as the crowds dispersed and Millbrook returned to its usual quiet rhythm, Jace, Ollie, and Martha sat in Emma's living room, surrounded by letters and photographs from people whose lives had been touched by her legacy. "Do you think we did right by her?" Jace asked, voicing the question that had haunted him throughout their journey. "Do you think Emma would be proud of what we've accomplished?" Martha, who had become the keeper of Emma's memory and the guardian of her values, smiled with the confidence of someone who had known Emma personally and understood her heart. "Emma never wanted to be famous," she replied. "She wanted to help children. Today, over 100 children have access to clean water because of her invention. Thousands more have been inspired to use their own talents to help others. Emma's love has reached further than she ever could have imagined." Ollie, who had grown from a quiet, grieving boy into a confident young advocate for humanitarian innovation, added his own perspective. "I think Emma would be happiest knowing that her story is helping other kids believe they can make a difference. Every time someone hears about what she did and decides to help someone else, Emma's love keeps growing." As night fell over the house at 1247 Sycamore Street, The three people who had been brought together by Emma's legacy reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with an $800 gamble and led to a global movement inspired by a 12-year-old girl's determination to help others. The memorial plaque in the town square would weather and fade over the decades, but Emma's true monument was built from something more enduring than bronze or granite. It was constructed from the lives she had saved, the communities she had strengthened, and the hearts she had touched with her example of selfless love. Her invention would continue working in villages around the world, long after everyone who remembered her personally had passed away. But more than that, her story would continue inspiring young people to believe that age is no barrier to changing the world, that love is stronger than death, and that the greatest gift anyone can give is the decision to use their talents in service of others. In the end, Emma Hartwell had achieved the immortality that every parent hopes for their child, not the immortality of fame or fortune, but the immortality that comes from making the world a better place for those who come after us. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn morning that reminded Jace of the day he'd first bought the house, he stood in Emma's former laboratory, watching his son put the finishing touches on his latest invention. The basement that had once held Emma's secret work now served as headquarters for the Emma Hartwell Foundation's Young Inventors Program, where children from around the world came to develop their own solutions to humanitarian problems. Ollie, now 12 the same age Emma had been when she'd perfected her water purification system, was working on a device he'd designed to help children with mobility challenges navigate rough terrain in developing countries. His invention combined Emma's elegant engineering principles with his own understanding of what it meant to need help when the world seemed determined to knock you down. "Dad, look at this," Ollie called out, his voice filled with the excitement that Jace had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. "I figured out how to make the wheels adapt automatically to different surfaces. It's based on something Emma wrote about in her notebooks, the idea that the best inventions anticipate problems before they happen." Jace smiled, watching his son work with the same focused intensity that Emma had shown in her final months. But unlike Emma, Ollie had time to experiment, time to fail and try again, time to collaborate with other young inventors who shared his commitment to using intelligence in service of others. The house at 1247 Sycamore Street had been transformed while preserving everything that made it sacred. Emma's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it, but the rest of the house had become a living memorial to her vision. The dining room served as a conference space where humanitarian organizations planned deployment strategies for new inventions. The living room hosted visiting families whose children had benefited from Emma's water purification systems and wanted to thank her memory in person. Martha, now officially the Foundation's Director of Youth Programs, had moved into the house to help manage the constant stream of visitors, volunteers, and young inventors who came to study Emma's work and develop their own projects. At 78, she had found a second career that fulfilled her in ways that 42 years of library work had never quite achieved. "We received the quarterly report from the field deployments," Martha announced as she entered the laboratory with a stack of photographs and letters. Emma's water purification systems are now operating in 63 countries. The latest count shows over 300 people with access to clean water because of her invention. But the numbers, impressive as they were, told only part of Emma's story. The letters that arrived daily at the Foundation painted a more complete picture of her legacy's impact. Parents wrote to thank Emma for saving their children's lives. Teachers described students inspired by her example to pursue careers in science and engineering. Young inventors shared their own projects, always crediting Emma's story with teaching them that age was no barrier to making a difference. One letter had particularly moved everyone at the Foundation. It came from a 15-year-old girl in Bangladesh whose village had received one of Emma's water purification units 3 years earlier. "Dear Emma," the letter began, "I know you died a long time ago, but I wanted to tell you that your invention saved my little brother's life. Before your water cleaner came to our village, many children got sick from dirty water. My brother almost died when he was only 4 years old. The letter continued. Now I am studying engineering so I can invent things like you did. My teacher says I am good at solving problems, and I want to use that gift to help other children the way you helped my brother. Thank you for showing me that girls can be inventors, and that the best reason to be smart is to help other people. Stories like these arrived weekly, each one a testament to the ripple effects of Emma's choice to spend her final months creating rather than grieving. Her water purification systems had not only saved lives, they had inspired a generation of young people to believe that they could change the world through innovation and compassion. The Emma Hartwell Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The patent licensing fees, combined with donations from around the world, now funded clean water projects, youth inventor programs, and educational initiatives in over 40 countries. Major corporations competed for the opportunity to manufacture products using Emma's designs, with all profits directed toward humanitarian purposes. But perhaps the Foundation's most important work was its annual Young Inventors Fair, held each year in Millbrook on the anniversary of Emma's death. Children from around the world gathered to present their own inventions designed to help others, following Emma's example of using intelligence and creativity in service of humanitarian goals. This year's fair had attracted over 200 young inventors, ranging in age from 8 to 18. Their projects addressed problems Emma would have understood: devices to help children with disabilities, systems to provide clean water in remote locations, technologies to improve education in underserved communities. Jace walked through the fair each year, with a mixture of pride and amazement, watching children who had never heard of Emma until they learned about the Foundation, carrying forward her vision with their own innovations. These young inventors didn't just admire Emma's technical brilliance, they had internalized her understanding that the greatest inventions are born from love for people you may never meet. As evening approached on this anniversary day, Jace and Ollie made their way to Emma's bedroom for their annual tradition of reading her letters and looking through the photographs that had accumulated over the years. The room remained exactly as Emma had left it, but it no longer felt like a shrine to interrupted dreams. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a story that was still being written by every child whose life had been saved by her invention, and every young person inspired by her example. "Dad," Ollie said as they settled onto the floor beside Emma's preserved desk, "do you think Emma knew that her story would inspire so many other kids to become inventors?" Jace considered the question, thinking about the girl who had hidden her work so carefully, who had written letters to a future she wouldn't see, who had trusted that someday the right people would find her laboratory and understand its significance. "I think Emma knew that love finds a way to multiply," he replied. She couldn't have predicted exactly how her story would unfold, but she trusted that caring about others creates more caring, that one person's choice to help can inspire countless others to help as well. As they prepared for bed, Jace reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years earlier, he and Ollie had been desperate, homeless, and convinced that their lives had been destroyed by loss. Now they lived in a house filled with purpose, surrounded by a global community united by Emma's example, working each day to ensure that her legacy continued growing. The Emma Hartwell Foundation's work would continue long after Jace and Ollie were gone. Emma's water purification systems would keep providing clean water for generations. Her story would keep inspiring young people to believe that they could change the world. Her example would keep proving that love is stronger than death, that the greatest gifts come from the decision to serve others, and that even the briefest lives can cast shadows that stretch across decades. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees that surrounded 1247 Sycamore Street, carrying with it the laughter of children who had gathered to honor a girl they had never met, but whose love had reached them across time and space. Inside, a father and son, who had been saved by Emma's legacy, prepared for sleep in the house that had taught them the most important lesson of all: Sometimes when you think you've lost everything, you're actually in exactly the right place to find what you're supposed to do with the rest of your life. Emma's music box played its coded melody one more time before Jace closed the lid. Its secret message now shared with the world, but its promise still unfolding in ways that would have amazed even the brilliant girl who had composed it. Her love had survived, just as she had trusted it would, growing stronger with each life it touched and each heart it inspired to care about others. The house settled into peaceful quiet, but Emma's work continued in laboratories and villages around the world, carried forward by people who understood that the greatest inventions are not just clever solutions to technical problems, but expressions of love for humanity itself. Every parent knows the weight of watching their child's eyes when you can't provide what they need. When Jonas Calder lost his job and home, he felt like he'd failed his 8-year-old daughter Lena in every way that mattered. All he could offer her was a run-down house filled with junk that his uncle had left behind. The neighbors called it the junk house because of all the old machinery and broken radios scattered everywhere. While Jonas worried about bills and job interviews, Lena explored their strange new home and found wonder in the forgotten things. One day she came to him and whispered, "Dad, there's something in the junk house." What Jonas found behind a hidden wall would change everything. His uncle had left behind a secret laboratory with inventions worth $50 million. But when others learned about the discovery, Jonas realized he'd have to fight to protect both his daughter and the legacy his family had been hiding. What would you do if losing everything led you to find more than you ever imagined? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the grimy windows of what the locals had dubbed the junk house, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories in the stale air. Jonas Calder stood in the doorway of what had once been a living room, watching his daughter Lena navigate between towers of old electronics and rusted mechanical parts with the grace of a child who had learned to find beauty in broken things. 3 months ago, Jonas had been a project manager at Meridian Construction, pulling down $65,000 a year and living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with Lena in the suburbs of Millbrook. He had health insurance, a savings account, and plans for Lena's college fund. Then the recession hit the construction industry like a sledgehammer, and companies started laying off workers in waves. Jonas had thought his 15 years of experience would protect him. But when Meridian downsized by 40%, seniority meant nothing. The unemployment benefits lasted 8 weeks. His savings account, which had seemed reasonable for emergencies, evaporated with shocking speed when faced with rent, utilities, groceries, and Lena's school expenses. He had applied for every construction job within a 50-mile radius, then expanded his search to include project management positions in other industries. Nothing. The economy had too many qualified people chasing too few positions. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday morning while Lena was at school. Jonas had stared at the legal document, feeling something cold settle in his chest. He had exactly 17 days to come up with 3 months back, rent, or find somewhere else to live. That evening, as he watched Lena do her homework at their small kitchen table, he realized he would have to tell her they were losing their home. But before he could find the words, the phone rang. It was Margaret Winters, the lawyer handling his great-uncle Chester's estate. Uncle Chester had died 6 months. Earlier, a man Jonas barely remembered from childhood family gatherings, known for his wild stories about inventions and government conspiracies. Most of the family had considered Chester eccentric at best, possibly mentally ill at worst. "Your uncle left you his property in Millbrook," Margaret had said, her voice carrying a note of apologetic resignation. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Calder. It's not much. The house needs extensive work, and it's filled with, well, decades of collected items. But it's yours free and clear, no mortgage, and the property taxes are current." Jonas had driven out to see the house that same evening, leaving Lena with their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. The property sat on 2 acres at the end of Maple Street, where the suburban development gave way to overgrown fields. The house itself was a 1940s craftsman that might have been charming once, but years of neglect had left the white paint peeling and the front porch sagging. What struck Jonas immediately was the sheer volume of stuff visible through every window, stacks of boxes, electronic equipment, and machinery that seemed to fill every available space. The key Margaret had given him stuck in the front door lock, but eventually turned with a grudging click. The smell hit him first, not unpleasant, but musty and complex, like old books mixed with motor oil and something metallic he couldn't identify. The interior was a maze. Narrow pathways wound between towers of cardboard boxes, shelves lined with radio parts, and tables covered with mechanical devices in various states of assembly and disrepair. In what had once been the living room, a massive oak desk sat buried under layers of blueprints, technical manuals, and notebooks filled with Chester's precise handwriting. Jonas had picked up one of the notebooks at random and found pages of mathematical equations, circuit diagrams, and notes about something called harmonic energy conversion. The writing was methodical, almost obsessive, with dates going back decades. Standing there in the cluttered house, Jonas had felt a strange mix of desperation and possibility. It wasn't the home he would have chosen for Lena, but it was shelter, and it was free. More importantly, it was theirs, at least until he could figure out something better. Now, 3 weeks later, Jonas watched Lena crouch beside an old radio, her small fingers tracing the brass dials with the kind of reverence other children reserved for toys. She had adapted to their new circumstances with a resilience that both amazed and broke his heart. When he had explained that they were moving to Uncle Chester's house, she had simply nodded and asked if she could bring her books. "Dad, look at this," Lena called, holding up what appeared to be a hand-built crystal radio. Uncle Chester wrote his name right here on the bottom. Jonas joined her beside the radio, noting the careful inscription, C. Calder, 1978, Prototype, 3. Everything in the house seemed to be labeled this, way dates, version numbers, cryptic notations that suggested Chester had been far more methodical in his collecting than it first appeared. "He must have built this himself," Jonas said, examining the craftsmanship. The components were arranged with precision, and the soldering work was professional quality. "Your great-uncle was apparently quite an inventor." Lena's eyes lit up with the kind of curiosity that made Jonas remember why he loved being her father, even when everything else in his life felt like it was falling apart. She had her mother's eyes, Sarah's eyes bright green, and always asking questions. Sarah had died in a car accident when Lena was 3, leaving Jonas to navigate single parenthood while grieving the loss of the woman who had been his anchor. In many ways, that loss had prepared him for this current crisis. When you've already lost the most important thing in your life, other losses feel manageable by comparison. "Can we make it work?" Lena asked, cradling the radio carefully. "Maybe," Jonas said, though he had no idea how to repair a crystal radio. "We'll have to learn together." This had become their routine over the past 3 weeks. While Jonas spent his mornings applying for jobs online and his afternoons driving to interviews that seemed to go nowhere, Lena explored the house like an archaeologist, uncovering treasures and curiosities that spoke to Chester's decades of solitary work. She had found boxes of vacuum tubes arranged by size, drawers full of resistors and capacitors sorted by value, and shelves lined with technical manuals covering everything from electronics to mechanical engineering. The more Jonas learned about his uncle, the more mysterious the man became. Neighbors remembered Chester as a quiet loner who had worked at the local radio station for 30 years before retiring in the early 1990s. He had never married, rarely socialized, and spent most of his time tinkering in his house. But the sophistication of the equipment Jonas found suggested Chester's interests had gone far beyond hobbyist electronics. In the basement workshop, Jonas had discovered a complete electronics lab with test equipment that looked expensive and professional. Oscilloscopes, frequency generators, and measurement devices that Jonas recognized from his engineering courses in college sat on workbenches that Chester had obviously used regularly. The basement also contained something that puzzled Jonas: several areas where the concrete floor showed signs of recent patching, as if Chester had been digging up and re-pouring sections of the foundation. Mrs. Hartwell, the elderly woman who lived in the house closest to Chester's property, had been their most valuable source of information about their predecessor. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing happening in the neighborhood. 3 days after Jonas and Lena moved in, she had appeared at their front door with a casserole and a wealth of stories about Chester. "Your uncle was a brilliant man," she had told Jonas while Lena played with Mrs. Hartwell's ancient golden retriever in the backyard. "But he was also frightened of something. In his later years, he would check his mailbox at odd hours, always looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to be watching him." Mrs. Hartwell had lowered her voice conspiratorially. "There were men who came around asking questions about Chester, even after he died. Government types, or maybe corporate. They had that look, you know. Too clean, too serious. They wanted to know if Chester had left behind any papers or equipment." Jonas had pressed for more details, but Mrs. Hartwell claimed she had told the men nothing. "Chester had been a good neighbor," she said, "quiet and helpful when she needed her gutters cleaned or her driveway shoveled. She owed him her loyalty, even in death." Now, as Jonas watched Lena carefully set the crystal radio on Chester's old desk, he wondered what his uncle had been working on that could attract the attention of government agents. The house contained enough electronic equipment to stock a small laboratory, but Jonas had yet to find anything that seemed particularly significant or valuable. Most of the devices appeared to be experiments or prototypes, interesting from a technical standpoint but hardly worth government scrutiny. His laptop chimed with an email notification, pulling Jonas back to the immediate reality of their situation. Another job rejection, this one from a construction firm in the next county. The email was polite and generic, thanking him for his interest, while informing him they had selected a candidate whose qualifications more closely matched their needs. Jonas closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes. The unemployment benefits had stopped 2 weeks ago, and his savings account now contained exactly $47.32. He had been selling items from their old apartment furniture, electronics, anything with value to buy groceries and keep their cell phone service active. But those resources were nearly exhausted. "Dad?" Lena's voice was soft, concerned. "Are you okay?" Jonas looked at his daughter, who was watching him with the kind of adult awareness that no 8-year-old should have to develop. She understood more about their situation than he wished she did, but he had learned that trying to shield her completely from their circumstances only made her more anxious. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, managing a smile, "just thinking about what we should explore next in Uncle Chester's collection." Lena brightened immediately. "I found something interesting in the kitchen. There's a notebook wedged behind the refrigerator. I couldn't get it out, but I could see writing on the edges." Jonas followed her to the kitchen, where she pointed to a gap between the old refrigerator and the wall. Sure enough, Jonas could see the corner of what appeared to be a leather-bound notebook. He managed to work it free, revealing a journal with C. Calder, Workshop Manual, 7, embossed on the cover. The notebook fell open to a page, dated 15 years earlier. Chester's handwriting filled the margins around detailed technical drawings of what appeared to be some kind of energy conversion device. At the bottom of the page, in larger letters than the rest of the text, Chester had written, "They're getting closer. Must finish before they find me." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine as he read the words. Whatever Chester had been working on, whatever had made him fearful in his final years, it was documented in this notebook. And if Mrs. Hartwell was right about men still asking questions, then perhaps Chester's secrets were still worth pursuing or still worth hiding. As the afternoon light began to fade, Jonas sat at Chester's desk with Lena beside him, both of them studying the mysterious notebook. For the first time since losing his job, Jonas felt something other than despair about their future. Perhaps Uncle Chester had left them more than just a house full of junk. Perhaps he had left them a puzzle worth solving, and maybe, just maybe, a way out of their desperate circumstances. 3 days after finding Chester's workshop manual, Jonas woke to the sound of static electricity crackling through the house. The noise was faint but persistent, like the hum of an old television tuned to a dead channel. He checked his phone. 3:47 a.m. Beside him in the double bed they now shared in Chester's old bedroom, Lena stirred, but didn't wake. Jonas slipped out of bed and followed the sound down the hallway, past towers of boxed equipment and shelves lined with mechanical curiosities. The static grew louder as he approached the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. He was certain he had closed it before going to bed. The basement was Chester's domainer workshop that Jonas had only briefly explored. Wooden workbenches lined the walls, covered with electronic testing equipment, soldering stations, and projects in various stages of completion. In the center of the room sat Chester's prized possession, a massive oak cabinet that housed what appeared to be a custom-built radio system with dozens of dials, switches, and meters. The static was coming from this radio. Jonas approached cautiously, noting that several of the meters were active, their needles dancing in response to some invisible signal. He had assumed the radio was non-functional, just another piece of Chester's collection, but clearly it was receiving power from somewhere. A small green light glowed steadily beside a switch marked "Receive." As Jonas reached for the volume control to silence the static, the noise suddenly coalesced into something recognizable, a human voice, speaking through layers of interference. Testing Sunday, March 15th, 1987. This is Chester Calder, recording message number 43 for Project Sanctuary. Jonas froze. His uncle's voice, 3 decades younger but unmistakably the same dry tone Jonas remembered from childhood family gatherings, continued speaking through the ancient radio. "I've confirmed they've been monitoring my communications, the phone calls, the mail, probably the house itself. Dr. Ramsey was right. The Department of Energy investigation was just the beginning. They know what we've accomplished, and they want it buried along with anyone who understands how it works." The voice paused, and Jonas could hear papers rustling in the background of the recording. "I'm implementing the Sanctuary Protocol tonight. The working prototype will be secured in the sub-basement chamber, along with all documentation and component specifications. If something happens to me, if I disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, then the backup transmitter will activate automatically after a preset delay. Anyone in my family who inherits this house will eventually hear this message." Jonas felt his heart racing. His uncle's paranoid stories suddenly didn't seem so paranoid. "The device I've created, what we call the resonance engine, represents a fundamental breakthrough in energy conversion. We're not talking about improved efficiency, we're talking about a technology that could make fossil fuels obsolete overnight. Clean, unlimited power drawn from quantum fluctuations in the vacuum itself. The implications are, the transmission dissolved into static again, but Jonas had heard enough. He fumbled for the notebook, where he had seen Chester write about them getting closer. The dates aligned. Chester had made this recording just 2 years after writing that paranoid note. "Dad?" Lena's voice from the basement stairs made Jonas jump. "What's that noise?" "Just Uncle Chester's radio," Jonas said, though his voice came out strained. "Go back to bed, sweetheart." But Lena was already descending the stairs in her pajamas, her bare feet silent on the wooden steps. She approached the radio with the fearless curiosity that Jonas both admired and worried about. "It's talking," she said, pressing her ear close to one of the speakers. "It's just an old recording, honey. Sometimes radios pick up." "No, Dad." Lena's voice was firm with the certainty that only children possess. "It's trying to tell us something important." As if responding to her words, the static cleared again, and Chester's voice returned with startling clarity. "The resonance engine requires 3 components to function: the harmonic frequency generator, the quantum field stabilizer, and what I call the consciousness interface. The last component is the most crucial and the most dangerous. The device doesn't just convert energy, it responds to human intention, to focused thought patterns. That's why they want it so badly, and why it can never fall into the wrong hands. Lena looked up at Jonas with wide eyes. Uncle Chester hid something special in the house. Lena, this is just. Jonas stopped himself. The fear in Chester's recorded voice was genuine, and the technical details were far too sophisticated for a simple hobbyist. Whatever his uncle had been working on, it was real. The voice continued. I've encoded the access sequence in items throughout the house. The radio will only activate for family members. The receivers are tuned to specific genetic markers in our bloodline. If you're hearing this, then you're a Calder, and you have a choice to make. You can pretend this message never happened, live your life, and let my work remain buried. Or you can follow the clues I've left behind and claim what I've discovered. A new sound emerged from the radio series of musical tones, like a simple melody played on electronic chimes. That's the activation sequence for the first lock, Chester's voice explained. Memorize it. You'll need to reproduce these tones exactly to access the sub-basement chamber. But be warned, once you begin this journey, there will be others who notice. The same people who made me disappear will come looking for you. The static returned, drowning out Chester's voice. Jonas reached for the volume control, but before he could adjust it, the radio fell silent. The green light beside the receive switch flickered once and went dark. Play it again, Dad, Lena said, her small hand reaching for the power switch. Jonas gently stopped her. I don't think it works that way, sweetheart. But Lena was already humming the melody. They had heard a simple sequence of 8 notes that she reproduced perfectly. Jonas realized his daughter had inherited more than just her mother's eyes. She had Sarah's gift for music, the ability to hear a tune once and remember it forever. We have to find Uncle Chester's secret, don't we? Lena asked, looking up at him with complete trust. Jonas knelt beside his daughter, studying her face in the dim light of the basement workshop. 3 days ago, he had been a desperate man facing eviction and unemployment. Now he was apparently the heir to some kind of scientific breakthrough that his uncle had died protecting. The rational part of his mind insisted this was all nonsense, paranoid delusions of an eccentric old man who had spent too many years alone with his inventions. But the recording had been real. The technical language was precise and detailed. And most convincing of all, Chester had somehow rigged the radio to respond only to family members, which suggested a level of sophistication that went far beyond hobbyist electronics. What do you think, Lena? Jonas asked. Should we try to solve Uncle Chester's puzzle? Lena nodded solemnly. He left it for us, didn't he? Like a treasure hunt, but important. Jonas thought about their financial situation, about the rejection letters accumulating in his email inbox, about the $47 in their bank account. Whatever Chester had hidden, it couldn't make their circumstances any worse. And if there was even a small chance that his uncle had actually invented something valuable— Okay, Jonas said, we'll try to find Uncle Chester's secret, but this has to be our secret, just between us. We don't tell anyone what we heard tonight. Lena crossed her heart with her finger, a gesture Sarah had taught her years ago. Promise, Dad. As they climbed the basement stairs together, Jonas found himself humming the 8-note melody Lena had memorized. Tomorrow, they would begin searching for Chester's clues in earnest. Tonight, for the first time in months, Jonas fell asleep with something other than despair filling his thoughts. He dreamed of his uncle's voice, speaking about impossible technologies and unlimited energy, about secrets hidden in plain sight and enemies who would kill to possess them. In his dream, Chester wasn't paranoid at all. He was simply a man who had discovered something wonderful and terrible, and who had chosen to trust his family with the burden of deciding what to do with it. When Jonas woke the next morning, he could still hear the 8-note melody playing in his head, and he knew their lives had changed forever. The blueprint fragment fell from between the pages of a 1970s electronics manual like a whisper from the past. Jonas had been systematically searching Chester's collection, looking for anything that might relate to the 8-note sequence or the mysterious resonance engine. when the torn piece of technical drawing fluttered to the floor. Lena, who had become his eager assistant in their treasure hunt, picked up the fragment and studied it with the focused attention she usually reserved for her favorite books. "Dad, look at these symbols. They're the same ones from Uncle Chester's notebook." Jonas examined the blueprint fragment. It showed part of what appeared to be a cylindrical device with intricate internal components. Mathematical equations filled the margins, along with notes written in Chester's precise handwriting. At the bottom of the fragment, someone had drawn the musical staff notation for the 8-note melody they had heard from the radio. "The resonant frequency generator," Jonas read from the fragment's title. This must be one of the 3 components Chester mentioned. They were sitting in what had once been Chester's living room, surrounded by the organized chaos of their search. Over the past week, they had developed a system for exploring the house methodically. Jonas would examine the technical aspects of Chester's collection, while Lena used her intuitive understanding to spot patterns and connections that escaped her father's more analytical approach. The search had become necessary for practical reasons, as well as curiosity. Jonas's job prospects remained non-existent, and their savings were nearly depleted. He had started researching the value of Chester's electronics collection, hoping to sell some items without destroying anything that might be important to solving their mystery. Some of the testing equipment in the basement was worth thousands of dollars, enough to keep them housed and fed for several months. But every piece of equipment they examined seemed to be part of Chester's larger project. Nothing appeared random or purely decorative. Even the boxes of vacuum tubes were sorted according to some system that Jonas was beginning to understand, related to harmonic frequencies and resonance patterns. "Mr. Calder?" The voice from the front porch made both Jonas and Lena freeze. They had been so absorbed in studying the blueprint fragment that neither had heard the car pull into their driveway. Jonas peered through the dusty front window and saw a man in his 50s standing on their porch. He wore an expensive-looking grey suit and carried a leather briefcase. His appearance was exactly what Mrs. Hartwell had described: too clean, too serious, with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Don't answer it," Lena whispered, though Jonas had already come to the same conclusion. They waited in silence as the man knocked again, more insistently this time. After several minutes, they heard his footsteps move around the side of the house. Jonas realized he was trying to peer through windows, looking for signs of occupancy. "Mr. Calder, I know you're in there," the man called out. "My name is Marcus Webb. I represent certain interests that had business dealings with your Uncle Chester. I'd like to discuss a proposition that could be very beneficial for you and your daughter." The mention of Lena made Jonas's protective instincts flare. He moved to the window and saw Webb standing in their backyard, studying the house with the methodical attention of someone conducting surveillance. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for this property," Webb continued, his voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. "Cash purchase, well above market value, with no questions asked about the contents. You could be living somewhere much more suitable for a young family by the end of the week." Jonas felt Lena's small hand slip into his. She was frightened, but trying not to show it. The idea of leaving the junk house was appealing. They could start fresh, somewhere safe, somewhere normal. But Chester's warning about people who would kill for his invention echoed in Jonas's mind. Webb walked slowly around the house, and Jonas tracked his movement by following the sound of his footsteps. The man was being thorough, examining the exterior structure, probably looking for signs of recent excavation or modification. When he reached the front of the house again, Webb pulled out his phone and made a brief call. "The subjects are definitely in residence," Jonas heard him say. "The house shows signs of recent habitation, and there's a vehicle registered to Jonas Calder in the driveway. Recommend we move to Phase 2 if he doesn't respond to the initial approach." Phase 2. Jonas didn't like the sound of that. After Webb's car disappeared down Maple Street, Jonas and Lena remained hidden for another hour before resuming their search. The encounter had shaken them both, but it had also confirmed that Chester's paranoia was justified. Someone was indeed watching, and they wanted whatever Chester had hidden badly enough to make unsolicited offers on the property. "We need to find Uncle Chester's secret before they come back," Lena said with the kind of matter-of-fact determination that reminded Jonas of her mother. They returned to examining the blueprint fragment, this time with increased urgency. The technical drawings showed sophisticated engineering that was clearly beyond anything a hobbyist could create. The device appeared to be designed to generate and focus specific electromagnetic frequencies, with components that Jonas recognized from his college engineering courses mixed with others that seemed completely unfamiliar. In the margin of the blueprint, Chester had written a series of numbers: 7.83 Hz, 14.7 Hz, 22.1 Hz. Below the numbers, he had added a note: Schumann resonance, harmonic series, key to consciousness interface. Jonas was familiar with Schumann resonances from his engineering study, extremely low-frequency electromagnetic waves that occurred naturally in the Earth's atmosphere. But he had never heard of anyone trying to artificially generate or manipulate them, and he certainly didn't understand what Chester meant by a consciousness interface. "Dad, I found something," Lena called from across the room. She was standing beside Chester's old television set, holding what appeared to be a small electronic device about the size of a garage door opener. "It was taped to the back of the TV," she explained, handing him the device. "And look, it has the same symbols as the blueprint." The device was clearly one of Chester's creations, built with the same meticulous attention to detail as everything else in the house. It had a small speaker, a digital display, and a series of buttons marked with musical note symbols. When Jonas pressed the power button, the display lit up with the words, "Frequency generator, prototype 3. Lena immediately began pressing the buttons in the sequence of the 8-note melody they had memorized. As each note played through the device's speaker, the corresponding frequency appeared on the digital display. When she completed the sequence, the device emitted a soft chime and displayed a new message: "Authentication accepted, chamber access enabled." "We did it," Lena whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. Jonas felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. They had solved the first part of Chester's puzzle, but he had no idea what chamber access meant, or what they would find when they discovered Chester's hidden laboratory. Webb's visit had made it clear that they were not the only ones interested in Chester's secrets, and Jonas suspected their mysterious visitors would not remain patient much longer. That evening, as Lena slept beside him in Chester's old bedroom, Jonas lay awake studying the blueprint fragment and the frequency generator. Tomorrow, they would begin searching for the entrance to Chester's sub-basement chamber. Tonight, he tried to prepare himself for whatever they might discover about his uncle's revolutionary invention and the dangerous people who wanted to possess it. The Medal of Honor was hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Advanced Electromagnetic Theory, wedged between hundreds of other technical books on Chester's workshop shelves. Lena discovered it while Jonas was examining the basement floor for signs of the sub-basement chamber entrance Chester had mentioned in his recorded message. "Dad, Uncle Chester was a soldier," Lena said, her voice filled with awe as she held up the bronze star-shaped medal. "There's a paper with it too." Jonas abandoned his search and joined his daughter at the bookshelf. The citation that accompanied the medal was dated 1972 and bore the seal of the United States Army. It commended Sergeant Chester Calder for distinguished service in classified research operations and exceptional valor in the defense of vital national security assets. What struck Jonas most was not the medal itself, but the fact that his family had never known about Chester's military service. The man they remembered as an eccentric loner who told wild stories about government conspiracies had apparently been decorated for classified military research. "There's more," Lena said, pulling a manila envelope from the same hiding place. Inside were photographs, military documents, and what appeared to be pages from a classified research journal. The photographs showed a much younger Chester in military uniform, working alongside other scientists in what looked like a sophisticated laboratory. One image caught Jonas's attention: Chester and two other men standing beside a device that bore a striking resemblance to the cylindrical generator shown in the blueprint fragment they had found. The journal pages were heavily redacted, with most of the technical details blacked out by military censors. But enough remained visible to paint a picture of cutting-edge energy research conducted under extreme secrecy. One entry, dated March 1973, mentioned successful demonstration of quantum vacuum energy extraction and potential applications for unlimited clean power generation. Your uncle was part of something called Project Blackbird. Jonas read from one of the documents. A classified research program investigating alternative energy sources for national defense applications. The final document in the envelope was a letter from the Department of Defense, dated 6 months after Chester's military commendation. It informed him that Project Blackbird was being terminated. All research materials were to be surrendered to military authorities, and participants were bound by lifetime secrecy agreements. The letter was signed by someone named Colonel Richard Hawthorne. Jonas felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Chester hadn't been a paranoid amateur inventor. He had been a trained military researcher who had apparently continued his classified work in secret after the official program ended. The technology he had hidden in the house wasn't just valuable, it was based on research that the government had once considered vital to national security. "We need to be very careful," Jonas told Lena as they studied the documents together. If Uncle Chester was working on secret military projects, then the people looking for his invention might be more dangerous than we thought. As if summoned by his words, the sound of a car engine came from their driveway. Jonas peered through the basement window and saw Marcus Webb getting out of a black sedan, accompanied by two other men in suits. This time, Webb wasn't alone, and he didn't look like he planned to take no for an answer. "Basement," Jonas whispered, gathering up Chester's documents. "Stay quiet and don't come upstairs no matter what you hear." Lena nodded and followed him deeper into the basement workshop, where they crouched behind one of Chester's workbenches. The sound of footsteps on the front porch was followed by aggressive knocking. "Mr. Calder, we know you're in there." Webb's voice carried through the house. "We also know you've been exploring your uncle's collection. This is your last opportunity to discuss this situation reasonably." Jonas heard the front door rattle as someone tested the lock. When that failed, footsteps moved around the house to the back door. The sound of breaking glass told him that Webb and his associates had decided to invite themselves inside. "Search everything," Webb's voice commanded. The old man was clever, but he couldn't have hidden a full laboratory without leaving traces. "Look for recent construction, modified floor plans, anything that doesn't match the original house structure." Jonas held Lena close as they listened to the men moving through the house above them. Furniture was being moved, boxes opened, and papers rustled as Webb's team conducted a thorough search. The invasion felt like a violation of more than just their privacy, was an attack on the sanctuary that Chester had left them. "Sir, you need to see this," one of the men called from what sounded like the kitchen. "The basement access is here, and there are fresh footprints on the stairs." Jonas realized they were trapped. The only exit from the basement led directly to where Webb's men would be coming down. He looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the workshop was too open, with too much equipment to provide adequate cover. "Stay behind the radio," he whispered to Lena, positioning her behind Chester's massive ham radio cabinet. "No matter what happens, don't come out until they're gone." The basement door opened, and Jonas heard footsteps on the wooden stairs. He positioned himself near Chester's workbench, trying to look casual as Webb and one of his associates descended into the workshop. "Mr. Calder," Webb said, his voice carrying false warmth. "I was hoping we could avoid this kind of unpleasantness. Breaking and entering is technically illegal, but I'm sure we can work something out." "Get out of my house," Jonas said, trying to keep his voice steady. Webb smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Your house, yes, but not your uncle's secrets. We represent the original developers of the technology Chester stole when he left military service. We're simply here to reclaim what belongs to us." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jonas lied. "Of course you do," Webb replied, gesturing to the technical equipment surrounding them. You've been searching through Chester's collection, probably found some of his old research notes, maybe even discovered one of his hiding places. Webb's associate was examining Chester's workbenches methodically, picking up devices and testing electronic equipment. This is definitely military-grade hardware, he reported. Some of it matches descriptions from the Project Blackbird inventory. The name of Chester's classified program made Jonas's blood run cold. These men knew exactly what they were looking for, and they had the resources to find it. Here's what's going to happen, Webb continued conversationally. You're going to tell us everything you've learned about your uncle's work. In return, we'll make sure you and your daughter can start fresh somewhere far from here, with enough money to never worry about employment again. And if I refuse? Jonas asked. Webb's smile disappeared. Let's not explore that possibility just yet. I'd prefer to keep this civilized, for everyone's sake. The threat was clear, but Jonas realized he had one advantage: Webb, and his men didn't know about the hidden chamber yet. As long as Chester's main laboratory remained undiscovered, Jonas and Lena still had something to bargain with. I need time to think about your offer, Jonas said. Of course, Webb replied. 24 hours should be sufficient. We'll be in touch tomorrow evening for your decision. As Webb and his men left the basement, Jonas remained frozen behind the workbench until he heard their car drive away. Only then did he call for Lena to come out of hiding. Are they going to hurt us, Dad? She asked, her small face pale with fear. Jonas knelt beside her, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Not if we're smart and careful, but we need to find Uncle Chester's laboratory soon. It might be the only thing that can protect us. The prototype key was no larger than a house key, but its design was unlike anything Jonas had ever seen. Made from what appeared to be a specialized metal alloy, it had an intricate pattern of geometric shapes cut into its surface, and when Lena held it up to the light from Chester's old desk lamp, the key seemed to shimmer with an internal luminescence. She had found it exactly where Chester's recorded message had suggested family members would discover it hidden inside the mechanism of an antique mantel clock that had belonged to Jonas's grandmother. The clock hadn't worked in decades, but when Lena had pressed the sequence of numbers that corresponded to the 8-note melody on the clock face, a hidden compartment had opened in the base. It's warm, Lena observed, turning the key over in her small hands. Like it has electricity running through it. Jonas examined the key more closely. The metal was warm to the touch, and he could feel a subtle vibration when he held it, as if some kind of energy was flowing through the device. The geometric patterns weren't just decorative, they appeared to be precisely engineered channels, possibly designed to conduct or focus electromagnetic fields. Along with the key, the hidden compartment had contained a folded piece of paper with more of Chester's careful handwriting. The quantum field stabilizer requires both genetic authentication and harmonic resonance to activate. The key will respond only to direct descendants of the Calder bloodline when exposed to the correct frequency sequence. Use the tone generator to prepare the key, then locate the hidden access panel in the basement workshop. Remember, once you enter the laboratory, there's no going back to ignorance. Jonas had spent the morning after Webb's unwelcome visit searching the basement workshop for any sign of a hidden access panel. He had examined every wall, every piece of equipment, every square inch of the concrete floor, but found nothing that looked like a secret entrance. Now, holding Chester's mysterious key, he wondered if he had been searching in the wrong way. Dad, I think we need to use the frequency generator first, Lena said, picking up the electronic device they had discovered behind Chester's television. Uncle Chester's note says the key has to be prepared with the right tones. Jonas nodded and activated the frequency generator. When Lena played the 8-note melody, the device emitted each tone with perfect clarity, and Jonas noticed that the key began to vibrate more noticeably in response to the sounds. By the time the sequence finished, the key was glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with some internal energy source. Now we find the access panel, Jonas said, but he still had no idea where to look. Lena, however, had developed an intuitive understanding of Chester's thinking that often surpassed her father's more logical approach. She walked directly to Chester's massive ham radio cabinet and began examining its base. "Uncle Chester loved radios," she explained. "And this is the biggest, most important radio in the house. If I were hiding something really secret, I'd put it near the thing I cared about most." Her reasoning made perfect sense. Jonas joined her in examining the radio cabinet, and together they discovered that what appeared to be a solid wooden base was actually a carefully crafted cover. When Jonas pressed against one corner, a section of the base swung away on hidden hinges, revealing an electronic panel embedded in the concrete floor beneath. The panel was about the size of a laptop computer, with a sophisticated display screen and what appeared to be a slot designed to accept Chester's unusual key. But when Jonas inserted the key and tried to turn it, nothing happened. "Maybe it needs both of us," Lena suggested. Uncle Chester's message mentioned genetic authentication. What if it has to sense both our DNA? Jonas was skeptical, but he had learned to trust his daughter's insights about Chester's puzzles. They placed their hands on the panel together, with Jonas holding the key and Lena's small fingers resting on what looked like a scanning surface beside the key slot. The panel immediately came to life, displaying a message in Chester's familiar handwriting. "Welcome, Jonas and Lena Calder. Genetic scan confirmed. Preparing laboratory access." The floor beneath the radio cabinet began to move, sliding away to reveal a metal staircase descending into darkness. Warm air rose from the opening, carrying the scent of electronics and something else ozone, like the smell after a lightning storm. "Uncle Chester built a secret laboratory under the basement," Lena whispered in amazement. Jonas felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he peered down the staircase. Chester's recorded warnings about dangerous people and irreversible choices echoed in his mind. But their encounter with Webb had made it clear that they were already in danger, whether they explored the laboratory or not. "Stay close to me," he told Lena as they began their descent. The staircase led to a corridor lined with the same kind of metal paneling Jonas had seen in military facilities. Overhead lights activated automatically as they walked, revealing that the underground laboratory was far more extensive than Jonas had imagined. The corridor branched in several directions, with signs indicating different research areas: harmonic generation, quantum field laboratory, consciousness interface research. The main laboratory was a marvel of precision engineering. Chester had created a fully functional research facility beneath his house, complete with advanced electronic equipment, computer terminals, and what appeared to be a prototype of the device shown in the blueprint fragments they had found upstairs. The prototype stood in the center of the laboratory, a cylindrical chamber, about 8 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, constructed from the same unusual metal alloy as the key. Complex geometric patterns covered its surface, and multiple cables connected it to banks of electronic equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. "The resonance engine," Jonas breathed, recognizing the device from Chester's descriptions. Beside the prototype was a computer terminal with a note taped to the screen. "For Jonas and Lenaif, you found this laboratory. Then the outside world has become too dangerous for you to remain ignorant of what I've discovered. The attached files contain everything you need to understand the resonance engine and its implications. But be warned, this knowledge comes with responsibilities that will change your lives forever." Jonas activated the computer terminal and found hundreds of files documenting Chester's research over several decades. Technical specifications, test results, theoretical papers, and personal logs that revealed the full scope of his uncle's achievement. The resonance engine wasn't just an energy generator, it was a device that could tap into what Chester called quantum vacuum fluctuations, drawing unlimited clean energy from the fundamental structure of space itself. But more than that, Chester had discovered that the device responded to human consciousness, amplifying the focused intentions of its operators in ways that bordered on the miraculous. "It's like magic," Lena said, studying the images on the computer screen. but it's really science. Advanced science that most people wouldn't understand, Jonas agreed. No wonder Uncle Chester had to hide it. As they explored the laboratory files, Jonas began to understand the magnitude of Chester's discovery. The resonance engine represented a technology that could solve the world's energy problems overnight, but it also had military applications that would fundamentally shift the balance of global power. Any government or corporation that controlled this technology would have an enormous advantage over their competitors. Chester's personal logs revealed his growing paranoia in his later years, and Jonas now understood why. His uncle had possessed something that multiple organizations would kill to obtain, and he had spent decades living with the knowledge that discovery would mean death. "Dad," Lena said quietly, "we're not going to give this to the bad men, are we?" Jonas looked at his daughter, then at the miraculous device Chester had created. Whatever they decided to do with Chester's invention would determine not just their own future, but potentially the future of humanity itself. "No, sweetheart," he said finally. "We're going to figure out how to use Uncle Chester's gift the right way." The video message was hidden inside Chester's old television set, just as his radio message had been embedded in the ham radio system. But this recording was different, more recent, more urgent, and filled with information that changed everything Jonas thought he knew about his uncle's fate. Chester's face appeared on the television screen as soon as Jonas activated the hidden playback system, and Jonas was struck by how much older his uncle looked than in the military photographs they had found. His hair was completely grey, his face lined with the weight of decades spent in hiding, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence Jonas remembered from childhood. "If you're watching this, Jonas, then you've found my laboratory and begun to understand what I've been protecting," Chester's recorded image said. "But there's something else you need to know, something I couldn't risk putting in the radio transmission." Chester paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression of profound sadness. "I'm not dead, Jonas. My death was staged, necessary to throw off the people who have been hunting me for 30 years. I've been living in a secure facility, continuing my research, waiting for the right time to emerge and reveal what I've discovered to the world." Jonas felt his legs give out, and he sat down heavily in Chester's old recliner. Beside him, Lena stared at the television screen with wide eyes, processing the impossible news that their great-uncle was alive. "The resonance engine you found in the laboratory is only a prototype," Chester continued. "I've built a full-scale version in my current location, and I've confirmed that it works exactly as my theories predicted. The device can generate unlimited clean energy, but more importantly, it can amplify human consciousness in ways that could transform our species." The camera angle shifted, and Jonas could see that Chester was speaking from what appeared to be another laboratory, this one even more sophisticated than the one hidden beneath the house. "The consciousness interface component I mentioned is the key to everything. The resonance engine doesn't just convert quantum vacuum energy into usable power, it creates a feedback loop with human thought patterns, allowing focused intention to direct and amplify the energy output in ways that seem impossible." Chester leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "I've discovered that our consciousness isn't confined to our brains, Jonas. It's connected to the quantum field that underlies all reality. The resonance engine simply provides a technological interface to access that connection. In the right hands, it could heal the sick, restore damaged ecosystems, even extend human life indefinitely. But in the wrong hands..." The recording flickered, and when it stabilized, Chester's expression had grown grave. "The people hunting me aren't just interested in the energy applications. They've realized that the consciousness interface could be weaponized, used to control or manipulate human thoughts on a massive scale. They want to turn my discovery into the ultimate tool of oppression." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of what Chester was describing went far beyond anything he had imagined. "There's a group called the Prometheus Initiative," Chester continued. "They claim to be a private research consortium, but they're actually backed by military intelligence agencies from multiple countries. They've been developing their own version of consciousness manipulation technology, and they believe my work holds the key to perfecting their programs. The video shifted again, showing Chester standing beside a device that dwarfed the prototype in the basement laboratory. This version of the resonance engine was the size of a small building, with crystalline components that seemed to pulse with internal light. I've spent the last decade building this full-scale version and testing its capabilities. The results exceed even my most optimistic projections. A single device could provide clean energy for an entire continent, while simultaneously enhancing the cognitive abilities of everyone within its field of influence. But the same technology that could usher in a new golden age for humanity could also enslave every mind on Earth. Lena moved closer to Jonas, instinctively seeking comfort as Chester's warnings grew more ominous. The prototype in the basement laboratory is functional but limited, Chester explained. I designed it as a teaching tool, something that would allow my family to understand the principles involved without accessing the full power of the technology. But even that prototype will be enough to convince the Prometheus Initiative that you found my work. Chester's image flickered again, and when it returned, he was holding what appeared to be a small, crystalline device. "This is a quantum communication beacon," he said. "I've hidden one in the laboratory beneath your house. If you activate it, I'll know that you've discovered my secret, and I'll begin the process of emerging from hiding. But Jonas, you need to understand, once you activate that beacon, there's no going back. The Prometheus Initiative will detect the signal, and they'll mobilize every resource they have to capture you, Lena, and the technology." The weight of the decision Chester was asking them to make settled on Jonas like a physical burden. They could ignore the beacon, pretend they had never found the laboratory, and try to live normal lives. But Webb and his associates had already found them, and Jonas doubted they would be allowed to simply walk away from Chester's secrets. "If you choose to activate the beacon," Chester continued, "you'll be committing yourself and Lena to a path that will put you in constant danger until we can find a way to make the technology public and prevent it from being monopolized by any single group. But if you don't activate it, the Prometheus Initiative will eventually find the prototype anyway, and they'll use it to locate my full-scale device." Chester's expression softened, and for a moment he looked like the eccentric Uncle Jonas remembered from family gatherings. "I know I'm asking a lot of you, Jonas. You didn't choose this responsibility, and it's not fair that Lena has to grow up in the shadow of my work. But she's special. I can see it in the genetic markers, the same intuitive connection to quantum fields that her grandmother possessed. Lena may be the key to ensuring that humanity uses this technology wisely." The recording began to fade, but Chester's final words came through clearly. "The beacon is hidden behind the main control panel of the prototype. If you decide to activate it, place your hand on the crystalline surface and think clearly about making contact with me. The quantum entanglement between the beacon and my device will carry your intention across any distance. But remember, once you make that choice, your old lives will be over forever." The television screen went dark, leaving Jonas and Lena sitting in the underground laboratory with the most important decision of their lives ahead of them. Above them, Jonas could hear the sound of vehicles in their driveway. Webb had returned, probably with more men and less patience than he had shown during his previous visits. "Dad," Lena whispered, "Uncle Chester is really alive." "It sounds like it, sweetheart," Jonas replied, still struggling to process everything they had learned. "And he needs our help?" Jonas looked at his daughter's face, seeing the same determination that had helped her solve Chester's puzzles. "Yes, I think he does." The sound of breaking glass from upstairs told them that Webb's men were no longer bothering with polite requests for entry. Whatever decision Jonas and Lena made about Chester's beacon, they needed to make it quickly. "What do you think we should do?" Jonas asked, realizing that his 8-year-old daughter might have better judgment about this situation than he did. Lena looked at the resonance engine prototype, then at the television screen where Chester's image had been. "Uncle Chester trusted us with his secret," she said simply. "We should trust him too." Jonas nodded, knowing she was right. They moved to the prototype device and found the hidden panel Chester had described. Behind it was a crystalline object about the size of a smartphone, glowing with the same soft blue light they had seen in Chester's key. As footsteps echoed down the staircase to the laboratory, Jonas placed his hand on the beacon and focused his thoughts on a single, clear intention. "We need help, Chester. We're ready to do whatever it takes to protect your work and make sure it's used for good." The beacon flared with brilliant light, and Jonas felt a strange sensation, as if his consciousness had expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical body. For just a moment, he sensed another presence, distant but unmistakably real, acknowledging his call for help. Then Webb's voice echoed through the laboratory. Well, it seems the Calder family has more surprises than we anticipated." The laboratory access panel was more sophisticated than anything Jonas had imagined possible, even after discovering Chester's underground research facility. Hidden beneath what appeared to be a simple metal grate near the resonance engine prototype, the panel revealed itself only when both Jonas and Lena placed their hands on its biometric scanners simultaneously. "Genetic authentication confirmed," the panel announced in a synthesized voice. "Dual family member access protocol activated. Welcome to Sanctuary Level 2. Jonas felt his heart skip a beat. Sanctuary Level 2 implied there had been a Level 1 and possibly others. How deep did Chester's preparations go? The panel slid aside to reveal another staircase, this one leading even deeper underground. But before Jonas and Lena could explore further, they heard Marcus Webb's voice echoing from the level above them. "Seal the upper laboratory," Webb commanded his men. "If they've activated any kind of communication system, we need to prevent outside contact while we secure the technology." Jonas realized they had walked into a trap. By activating Chester's quantum beacon, they had not only summoned help from their uncle, they had also alerted Webb's organization to the exact location of the hidden laboratory. "Dad, we have to go deeper," Lena whispered, pointing toward the newly revealed staircase. "Uncle Chester wouldn't have built this unless we needed it." They descended quickly, the staircase spiraling down into what felt like the Earth's core. Motion-activated lights illuminated their path, revealing that this level of Chester's facility was even more sophisticated than the laboratory above. The walls were lined with what appeared to be advanced shielding material, and the air hummed with the barely audible vibration of powerful electronic systems. The corridor at the bottom of the staircase opened into a control room that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Multiple screens lined the walls, displaying data streams, security camera feeds, and what appeared to be real-time readings from sensors throughout the house and surrounding area. But what stopped Jonas in his tracks was the figure sitting calmly in a chair before the main control console. Chester Calder turned around and smiled at them, exactly as he had appeared in the video message, but somehow more solid, more real, more present than Jonas had expected. "Hello, Jonas," Chester said, his voice carrying the same dry humor Jonas remembered from childhood. "Hello, Lena. I was wondering when you two would make it down here." Jonas stared at his uncle, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "You're really alive? You've been here the whole time?" "Not the whole time," Chester replied, standing up from his chair with the careful movements of a man in his 70s. "But I've been monitoring the house since you moved in, waiting to see if you would discover my work and what you would choose to do with it." Lena ran to Chester and hugged him without hesitation, displaying the kind of trust that children reserve for family members who have proven themselves worthy of it. Chester knelt down and embraced her, his eyes bright with genuine affection. "You've done wonderfully, little one," he told her. "Your intuition about my puzzles was better than I could have hoped for." "Uncle Chester," Jonas said, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. "Webb and his men are in the laboratory upstairs. They know about the prototype, and they're looking for us." Chester nodded calmly. "Marcus Webb represents the Prometheus Initiative, just as I explained in my message. They've been hunting me for 3 decades, and they finally tracked my work to this location when you activated the quantum beacon." "Then we're trapped," Jonas said. "They have men surrounding the house, and we're underground with no way out." Chester's smile widened. Jonas, you're thinking like someone who believes in conventional limitations, but we're not dealing with conventional technology here. He gestured toward the screens lining the control room walls. Jonas could see security camera feeds showing Webb's men positioned throughout the house and around the property. There were at least a dozen armed individuals, far more than Jonas had realized. The Prometheus Initiative wants my technology, Chester continued, but they fundamentally misunderstand what they're dealing with. They think the resonance engine is just an advanced energy generator that can be mass-produced and weaponized. They have no comprehension of the consciousness interface component. Chester moved to the main control console and began activating systems with practiced efficiency. The screens around them came alive with data streams and technical readouts that meant nothing to Jonas, but clearly represented enormous complexity. The consciousness interface isn't just a feature of the technology, Chester explained as he worked. It's the core principle that makes everything else possible. The device doesn't generate energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations. It allows human consciousness to access and direct energy that was always there, waiting for us to evolve enough to perceive it. One of the screens showed a three-dimensional representation of the house and surrounding area, with energy patterns flowing through the structure like luminous rivers. "I've spent 30 years preparing for this moment," Chester said, "not just developing the technology, but creating the conditions necessary for it to be revealed to the world in a way that prevents any single group from controlling it." He turned to face Jonas and Lena, his expression growing serious. "The prototype upstairs isn't actually a prototype, Jonas. It's a complete, fully functional resonance engine, calibrated specifically for this location and this moment. I've been using it to maintain a quantum field around the entire property, a field that's been slowly expanding and strengthening for decades." Jonas felt a chill of understanding. "You've been preparing a demonstration." "More than that," Chester replied. "I've been preparing a transformation. When Webb and his men try to remove the device from this location, they'll trigger a cascade reaction that will activate every piece of equipment in the house simultaneously. The resulting field effect will be visible from space and impossible to suppress or contain." Lena looked up at Chester with complete trust. "Will it hurt people?" Chester knelt down beside her again. "No, little one. The field will enhance consciousness, not harm it. People within its influence will experience expanded awareness, increased empathy, and enhanced cognitive abilities. But they'll also become immune to the kind of mental manipulation that the Prometheus Initiative specializes in." He stood up and returned his attention to the control systems. "The technology can't be weaponized because it fundamentally changes the consciousness of anyone who tries to use it for harmful purposes. A person operating the resonance engine with malicious intent will find their own awareness expanded to the point where they can no longer maintain malicious thoughts." Jonas began to understand the elegance of Chester's plan. By allowing Webb to discover the laboratory and attempt to steal the technology, Chester was ensuring that the demonstration would happen under conditions that would make it impossible for any government or corporation to claim ownership of the discovery. "But what about us?" Jonas asked. "We'll be at the center of this field effect when it activates." Chester's smile returned. "You and Lena have been exposed to quantum field influences since you moved into the house. Your consciousness has already begun adapting to the expanded awareness that the full activation will bring. You'll experience the transformation more gradually and comfortably than the men upstairs." On the security screens, Jonas could see Webb's team setting up equipment around the resonance engine prototype. They had apparently decided to remove the device from the laboratory, exactly as Chester had predicted. "How long do we have?" Jonas asked. "Minutes," Chester replied. "Once they attempt to disconnect the device from its power source, the cascade will begin automatically. The quantum field that's been building around this property for 30 years will discharge all at once, creating a demonstration that will change how humanity understands consciousness, energy, and our place in the universe." Lena tugged on Chester's sleeve. "Uncle Chester, will my daddy and I be okay?" Chester knelt down one more time and took both of Lena's small hands in his. "More than okay, sweetheart. You're going to help your daddy and me show the world something wonderful. Something that will make sure no one ever has to be afraid or hungry or alone again." Above them, alarms began sounding as Webb's men started their attempt to extract the resonance engine. Chester moved to a final control panel and placed his hand on what appeared to be a quantum beacon, similar to the one Jonas had activated earlier. "Are you ready?" Chester asked, looking at both Jonas and Lena. Jonas took his daughter's hand and nodded. Whatever was about to happen, they would face it together as a family. Chester activated the beacon, and the entire underground facility began to vibrate with barely contained energy. The transformation that would change everything was about to begin. The complete energy device that Chester had spent 3 decades perfecting was far more beautiful and terrifying than Jonas had imagined. Through the security monitors in the underground control room, he watched Webb's men struggle to understand what they were attempting to steal, as the prototype in the laboratory above began to resonate with harmonics that seemed to come from the Earth itself. "They have no idea what they're touching," Chester said, his fingers dancing across control panels with the practiced precision of a concert pianist. "The Prometheus Initiative thinks they're dealing with conventional technology that can be transported and reverse-engineered. They don't understand that consciousness-responsive quantum fields can't be contained or controlledly guided." On the main screen, Jonas could see Webb directing his team with increasing urgency. The man's confidence from their earlier encounters had been replaced by barely controlled frustration as his technical specialists struggled to make sense of Chester's device. Every attempt to disconnect the prototype from its power source triggered warning alarms and caused the crystalline components to glow more brightly. "The cascade is beginning," Chester announced, pointing to a series of readouts that showed energy levels rising throughout the house and surrounding property. 30 years of accumulated quantum field potential is about to discharge in a single coordinated pulse. Lena pressed closer to Jonas, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength. "Dad, I can feel it happening. It's like the whole house is waking up." Jonas realized his daughter was right. Even in the shielded control room, he could sense something changing in the very fabric of reality around them. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential, and he found his thoughts becoming clearer and more focused than he had ever experienced. "The consciousness interface is already beginning to affect you," Chester explained. "Your awareness is expanding to perceive quantum field fluctuations directly. Most people never develop this sensitivity, but it appears to run in our family bloodline." Chester moved to what appeared to be the main control station, a sophisticated console that looked more like an altar than conventional electronics. At its center sat a crystalline sphere about the size of a basketball, glowing with the same blue light Jonas had seen in the various components of Chester's technology. "This is the heart of the system," Chester said, his voice taking on a reverent tone. "The consciousness interface core. It's been slowly building a quantum entanglement network that connects every piece of equipment in the house, every electronic device in the neighborhood, and ultimately every conscious mind within a 50-mile radius." Jonas felt his breath catch. 50 miles? Chester, that includes hundreds of thousands of people." "Exactly," Chester replied, his eyes bright with an emotion Jonas couldn't quite identify. "When the cascade completes, every person within the field will experience a temporary expansion of consciousness. They'll perceive reality from a broader perspective, understand their connection to the quantum field that underlies all existence, and most importantly, become immune to the kind of mental manipulation that organizations like the Prometheus Initiative depend on." On the security monitors, Jonas could see that Webb's men had finally managed to begin disconnecting the prototype from its mounting brackets. The moment they lifted the device, every screen in the control room flashed red, and a deep harmonic tone began emanating from the walls themselves. "Cascade initiation confirmed," Chester announced, his voice rising with excitement. "All quantum field generators are now entering synchronized resonance. Field expansion will reach maximum extent in approximately 12 minutes. Jonas watched in fascination as the three-dimensional display showed energy patterns spreading outward from their location, like ripples in a cosmic pond. The patterns were beautiful, flowing in spirals and geometric forms that seemed to follow the natural topology of consciousness itself. "Uncle Chester," Lena said, her voice carrying a strange quality that Jonas had never heard before. "I can see the patterns in my mind. They're connecting to people everywhere, like a giant web of light." Chester knelt beside Lena, studying her face with intense interest. "You're perceiving the quantum entanglement network directly, aren't you, without any technological interface?" Lena nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful, Uncle Chester. I can feel all the people, their thoughts and feelings and dreams. They're all connected, but most of them don't know it yet." Jonas felt a moment of paternal concern. "Is this safe for her? She's just a child." "She's more than just a child," Chester replied, his voice filled with awe. "Lena appears to have a natural sensitivity to quantum consciousness fields that's far beyond anything I've documented. She may be the first member of our species to develop these abilities organically, without technological assistance." The security monitors showed increasing chaos in the laboratory above. Webb's men were struggling to maintain control as their electronic equipment began malfunctioning. Radios crackled with interference, computers displayed impossible data streams, and the prototype device itself had begun levitating several inches above the floor, suspended by forces that conventional physics couldn't explain. "Sir, we need to evacuate immediately." Jonas could hear one of Webb's technicians reporting through the security system. "The device is exhibiting properties that don't match any known technology. Energy readings are off the charts, and we're detecting field effects that could be dangerous to human physiology." But Webb's response was exactly what Chester had predicted. "Negative. We're not leaving without that device. If it's more advanced than our intelligence suggested, that makes it even more valuable. Continue extraction procedures." Chester shook his head sadly. Marcus Webb represents everything that's wrong with how humanity approaches new technology. Instead of trying to understand it, instead of considering how it might benefit everyone, his first instinct is to control and weaponize it. The harmonic tone that had been emanating from the walls was growing stronger, and Jonas could feel it resonating in his bones. More than that, he could feel it resonating in his thoughts themselves, as if the sound was somehow harmonizing with the electrical patterns in his brain. "Chester, what exactly is going to happen when this cascade reaches full intensity?" Jonas asked. Chester moved to a bank of monitors showing real-time brain activity patterns from sensors throughout the house and surrounding area. "Every conscious mind within the field will experience what I call consciousness resonance. Their individual awareness will temporarily synchronize with the quantum field that connects all matter and energy in the universe. They'll understand, on a direct experiential level, that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, it's a fundamental property of reality itself." The implications were staggering. Jonas tried to imagine hundreds of thousands of people suddenly experiencing expanded consciousness simultaneously. "Won't that cause panic?" "Initially, perhaps," Chester admitted, "but the expansion brings with it an increased capacity for empathy and understanding. People will realize that harming others ultimately harms themselves, because at the quantum level, we're all aspects of the same unified consciousness experiencing itself from different perspectives." On the screens, Jonas could see that the effects were already beginning to manifest in the laboratory above. Webb's men were moving more slowly, their aggressive postures softening as the expanding field began to influence their consciousness. Several of them had stopped working entirely and were staring at the levitating prototype with expressions of wonder rather than greed. "Look at their faces," Lena said softly. "They're starting to understand." But Webb himself seemed to be resisting the field effects through sheer force of will. "Focus on the mission," he barked at his men. "Don't let some kind of psychoactive field manipulation interfere with your training. We have a job to complete." Chester frowned as he watched Webb's continued resistance. "Interesting," He's been conditioned to maintain rigid mental barriers against consciousness, expanding influences. The Prometheus Initiative has apparently developed techniques for protecting their operatives from exactly this kind of field effect. "Is that bad?" Jonas asked. "It means Webb won't experience the empathy expansion that should prevent him from trying to weaponize the technology," Chester replied. "He'll remain dangerous even after the cascade completes." The energy readings on Chester's instruments were approaching critical levels. The quantum field expansion was now spreading beyond the immediate property, reaching into the surrounding neighborhood and beyond. Jonas could see from the three-dimensional display that thousands of people were about to experience consciousness resonance for the first time in human history. 7 minutes to maximum field extent, Chester announced. "Jonas, Lena, I need you both to place your hands on the consciousness interface core. Your direct family connection to the field will help stabilize the expansion and ensure it manifests as enhancement rather than disruption." Jonas looked at the glowing crystalline sphere at the center of Chester's control console. "What will happen to us?" "You'll become the focal points for the field expansion," Chester explained. "Your consciousness will temporarily merge with the quantum field itself, allowing you to guide how the technology manifests for everyone within its influence. You'll have the power to ensure that this transformation serves humanity's highest good." Lena was already reaching toward the crystal, her small face serene with anticipation. "It wants us to touch it, Dad. It's been waiting for us." Jonas took a deep breath and placed his hand on the warm, pulsing surface of the consciousness interface core. Immediately, his awareness exploded beyond the boundaries of his individual identity. He could perceive the thoughts and feelings of every person within the expanding field, could sense the quantum connections that linked all matter and energy in the universe, could feel the infinite potential that lay dormant within human consciousness. Beside him, Lena's touch on the crystal created a harmony of awareness that was indescribably beautiful. Together, father and daughter became conduits for a transformation that would change not just their own lives, but the fundamental relationship between humanity and the cosmos itself. The cascade was entering its final phase, and the real confrontation was about to begin. Chester's decoy device was a masterpiece of misdirection, identical to the real resonance engine in every visible detail, but fundamentally different in its quantum structure. As Webb's men finally succeeded in lifting what they believed was Chester's revolutionary invention, Jonas watched from the underground control room as the decoy began its carefully programmed performance. "Activation sequence confirmed," Chester announced, his eyes fixed on the monitors showing Webb's team. "The decoy will provide exactly the kind of impressive display they expect while masking the true source of the consciousness field expansion." The fake device began to levitate more dramatically, spinning slowly in the air while projecting holographic displays of complex mathematical equations. Lights pulsed in rhythm with harmonic tones that filled the laboratory, creating exactly the kind of spectacular demonstration that would convince Webb's superiors that they had captured Chester's technology. But Jonas, his consciousness still expanded through contact with the real interface core, could perceive what was actually happening. The true resonance engine was the entire house-savory piece of equipment, every carefully placed component, every quantum field generator that Chester had installed over 3 decades of patient preparation. The device Webb was stealing was merely the most visible element of a technology that had been integrated into the fabric of reality itself. "They'll never understand what they actually have," Chester said with satisfaction. "The decoy will function perfectly for basic energy generation, even provide some limited consciousness interface effects. But it's missing the quantum entanglement network that makes the real technology revolutionary." On the security monitors, Jonas could see Webb directing his men to transport the levitating device toward the laboratory exit. The man's face showed a mixture of triumph and barely controlled greed as he supervised what he believed was the theft of the century. "Sir, the readings are unlike anything we've ever documented," one of Webb's technicians reported. "This device appears to be tapping directly into zero-point energy fields. The applications are practically unlimited." Webb's response was exactly what Chester had predicted. Excellent. Prepare it for immediate transport to the secure facility. Our employers will want to begin reverse engineering immediately. But as Webb's team maneuvered the decoy device up the stairs from the laboratory, the real transformation was accelerating. Jonas could feel the consciousness field expanding outward from their location like a wave of pure awareness, touching minds throughout the surrounding area. "Dad," Lena whispered, her small hand still pressed against the interface core. "People are waking up everywhere. I can feel them starting to understand." Jonas opened his expanded awareness to perceive what his daughter was sensing. Throughout the neighborhood, throughout the city, people were stopping their daily activities as the consciousness field reached them. They stood motionless for moments, eyes wide with wonder, as their individual awareness briefly merged with the infinite perspective of the quantum field. A mother playing with her children in a nearby park suddenly understood the profound connection between all living things. A businessman stuck in traffic realized that his pursuit of wealth was meaningless compared to the love he felt for his family. An elderly man sitting alone in his apartment felt the loneliness that had plagued him for years dissolve as he perceived his fundamental unity with all existence. "The expansion is reaching its maximum extent," Chester announced. "Field effects are now active across a 50-mile radius. Approximately 800,000 people are experiencing consciousness resonance simultaneously." On the monitors, Jonas could see that Webb's men had successfully transported the decoy device to ground level and were loading it into a specially equipped truck. But their movements had become strangely synchronized, as if they were all responding to the same unheard rhythm. "Even the Prometheus Initiative operatives are being affected," Chester observed. "Their conditioning can't completely protect them from direct exposure to consciousness field resonance." Webb himself seemed to be the only person maintaining complete resistance to the field effects. He moved with the same aggressive efficiency as before, barking orders at his men and coordinating the extraction operation with military precision. "Get that device secured and initiate departure protocols," Webb commanded. "We need to be mobile before local authorities respond to whatever these field effects are causing." But as Webb's truck began to pull away from the house, Jonas felt something shift in the quantum field patterns. The consciousness interface core beneath his palm grew warmer, and Lena's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Uncle Chester," she said urgently, "the bad man isn't finished. He's going to try to hurt people with the fake device." Chester frowned as he examined his instruments. "Impossible. The decoy doesn't have the power to—" He stopped mid-sentence as new readings appeared on his screens. "No. He's not planning to use the device as a weapon. He's planning to use it as bait." Jonas felt his heart sink as he understood Chester's realization. Webb wasn't just stealing the technology. He was using the dramatic theft as a distraction, while other Prometheus Initiative operatives moved to capture Jonas, Lena, and Chester himself. "There are more teams," Chester said grimly, pointing to new contacts appearing on his security sensors. "They're surrounding the property while we're focused on the primary extraction." Webb was never interested in just the device, he wants the people who created it. The real confrontation was just beginning, and Jonas realized that protecting Chester's technology might require sacrifices he wasn't prepared to make. The patent documents that Chester had hidden throughout the house for 3 decades suddenly became the most important papers in human history. As Jonas maintained contact with the consciousness interface core, he realized that his uncle had been preparing for this moment since the day he had faked his own death, not just technologically, but legally. Every component, every principle, every application of the resonance engine technology has been documented and filed with patent offices in 47 countries. Chester explained as alarms continued to sound from the security systems. But the patents were filed under sealed military classification, accessible only under specific circumstances. Jonas could see Webb's reinforcement teams closing in on the house through the underground facility's perimeter sensors. Men in tactical gear were positioning themselves at every possible exit, while electronic surveillance equipment scanned for signs of the real laboratory. What circumstances? Jonas asked, though part of his expanded consciousness already knew the answer. Public demonstration of the technology's consciousness enhancement capabilities, Chester replied. The moment the field expansion reached its maximum extent and affected 800,000 people simultaneously, automatic triggers activated in government databases worldwide. The classified patents are now entering the public domain. Lena's grip on the interface core tightened, and Jonas could feel her awareness reaching out to touch the minds of people throughout the affected area. Uncle Chester, everyone who felt the field expansion knows about the patents now. They understand what the technology can do, and they want to protect it. Jonas opened his own consciousness to perceive what Lena was sensing. Throughout the 50-mile radius affected by the consciousness field, people were accessing the newly declassified patent documents through government websites that had been programmed to release the information automatically. Scientists, engineers, and ordinary citizens were downloading the complete technical specifications for Chester's resonance engine technology. Brilliant, Jonas breathed, understanding the elegance of his uncle's plan. You've made it impossible for any single organization to monopolize the technology. By the time Webb realizes what's happened, millions of people will have access to the complete blueprints. Chester nodded, but his expression remained grave. The legal protection is only the beginning. Webb and the Prometheus Initiative won't be stopped by patent filings. They'll try to capture us and force us to build customized versions of the technology for their specific applications. On the security monitors, Jonas could see that Webb himself had returned to the house. He stood in the main laboratory, staring at the space where the decoy device had been, his face twisted with rage as he realized he had been outmaneuvered. "Sweep every room," Webb commanded his men. "They're still here somewhere, and they have access to the real technology. Find them." But Webb's men were moving more slowly than before, their aggressive postures continuing to soften as the consciousness field effects deepened their exposure to expanded awareness. Several of them had stopped following orders entirely, instead standing motionless with expressions of profound wonder. "Sir, the field effects are intensifying," one of Webb's technicians reported. "Our conditioning protocols aren't sufficient to maintain operational focus. Request permission to withdraw to minimum safe distance." Webb's response was immediate and harsh. "Negative. Activate the consciousness dampening equipment. We're not leaving without the primary targets." Jonas felt a chill as he watched Webb's men deploy devices he had never seen before, sophisticated electronic equipment that began projecting what appeared to be counter-resonance fields. The effect on the consciousness expansion was immediate and disturbing, like watching beautiful music being drowned out by discordant noise. "They've developed suppression technology," Chester said grimly. "I theorized this was possible, but I hoped they hadn't progressed to practical applications." The consciousness-dampening fields were creating zones of mental isolation throughout the house, severing the quantum connections that allowed expanded awareness. Jonas could feel his own enhanced perception beginning to fade in some areas, though the interface core maintained its connection in the shielded underground facility. "They're trying to cut us off from the field network," Lena said, her voice carrying a note of distress that Jonas had never heard before. "I can still feel the people outside, but the connection is getting weaker." Chester moved quickly to a secondary control panel and began activating systems that Jonas hadn't seen before. "Emergency protocols," he explained. "If the consciousness field is being suppressed, we need to shift to the backup plan." "There's a backup plan?" Jonas asked. "The patent documents were just the first line of defense," Chester replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "But the real protection comes from the technology itself. Watch." On the main display, Jonas could see the three-dimensional representation of the consciousness field as it responded to Webb's suppression equipment. Instead of simply fading, the field began to adapt, shifting its resonance frequencies to work around the dampening zones. "The quantum entanglement network is self-modifying," Chester explained. Every attempt to suppress consciousness expansion actually teaches the system how to overcome that specific type of interference. Webb's equipment is making the field stronger, not weaker. Jonas watched in amazement as the field patterns flowed like water around obstacles, finding new pathways to maintain the connections between expanded minds. The people throughout the 50-mile radius who had experienced consciousness resonance were now working together unconsciously, their collective awareness adapting to maintain the network despite technological interference. "It's alive," Lena whispered in wonder. "The field is learning and growing and becoming more than Uncle Chester designed it to be." Chester knelt beside her, his eyes bright with scientific fascination. "You're right, little one. The consciousness interface has evolved beyond my original parameters. It's become a truly collaborative intelligence, guided by the collective intention of everyone within its influence." But Webb wasn't finished. Jonas could see through the security monitors that the man had pulled out what appeared to be a military-grade communication device and was calling for additional support. "Priority Alpha authorization," Webb spoke into the device. "Request immediate deployment of the Prometheus protocol. We have confirmed contact with the consciousness technology, and civilian population exposure has exceeded acceptable parameters." Chester's face went pale. "The Prometheus protocol. I had hoped they would never develop it to operational status." "What is it?" Jonas asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Weaponized consciousness suppression," Chester replied grimly. "Instead of just blocking expanded awareness, it actively degrades human consciousness, reducing people to a state where they can't think independently or resist authoritarian control. It's everything I've spent my life trying to prevent." The implications were horrifying. Jonas realized that Webb's organization wasn't just interested in stealing Chester's technology, they were prepared to destroy human consciousness itself, rather than allow it to evolve naturally. "How long before they can deploy it?" Jonas asked. Chester checked his instruments and frowned. "The equipment is already airborne. Military transport aircraft carrying Prometheus protocol transmitters are approaching the area. They'll begin broadcasting suppression fields in approximately 8 minutes. Lena's hand pressed more firmly against the interface core, and Jonas could feel her consciousness reaching out to touch every mind within the expanded awareness network. "Uncle Chester, all the people who felt the field, they know what's coming. They're scared, but they want to help." Jonas opened his own awareness and felt what Lena was perceiving. Throughout the region, hundreds of thousands of people were experiencing a form of collective determination he had never imagined possible. They understood that their expanded consciousness was under attack, and they were prepared to defend it. "They're not just defending the technology," Jonas realized. "They're defending their own evolution." Chester nodded solemnly. "This is the moment I've been preparing for since I first discovered the consciousness interface principles. Humanity is choosing between two paths: expanded awareness and empathetic connection, or technological control and mental slavery." The sound of aircraft engines grew audible even in the underground facility. Webb's reinforcements were arriving, and the final confrontation was about to begin. "What do we do?" Jonas asked, looking at his uncle and daughter, two people who represented both the past and future of human consciousness. Chester placed his own hand on the interface core, joining Jonas and Lena in direct contact with the quantum field network. "We trust in the technology we've unleashed and the people it's connected. The consciousness field has grown beyond anything I originally designed. Now it's up to humanity itself to determine how this story ends." Above them, Jonas could hear Webb's men beginning their final assault on the underground facility. The battle for the future of human consciousness was about to reach its climax. Lena's inheritance box sat on the kitchen table, where Chester had left it 3 months after the consciousness field expansion changed everything. The small wooden container, carved with the same geometric patterns that had appeared throughout Chester's technology, contained items that represented not just the past, but the unlimited potential of the future. Jonas watched his daughter examine each object with the careful attention she had inherited from both her great-uncle and the expanded awareness that now connected her to the quantum field permanently. At 9 years old, Lena had become something unprecedented in human history, a child born into normal consciousness who had evolved naturally into a state of permanent quantum awareness. "This was Grandma Sarah's notebook," Lena said, holding up a leather-bound journal filled with her great-grandmother's research notes. "Uncle Chester says she was the first in our family to sense the quantum connections, even though she didn't have the technology to prove they existed." Jonas nodded, still amazed by how much their understanding of their family history had expanded. Chester's revelations after the consciousness field activation had included the discovery that the Calder family had carried genetic markers for quantum sensitivity for generations. Lena's grandmother, mother, and now Lena herself represented an evolutionary development that made them natural interfaces between human consciousness and the fundamental structure of reality. The transformation that had begun 3 months ago was still spreading. The consciousness field expansion had affected 800,000 people initially, but those individuals had become seeds for further expansion. Each person who experienced quantum awareness naturally developed the ability to facilitate the same expansion in others. Governments and corporations worldwide were struggling to adapt to a population that could no longer be controlled through traditional methods of manipulation and propaganda. "The Prometheus Initiative has been disbanded," Jonas said, reading from a news report on his tablet. "Marcus Webb and his associates are facing trial for crimes against humanity, though most of them have been granted clemency in exchange for cooperation with the Global Consciousness Research Initiative." Chester looked up from the advanced electronics he was assembling at the opposite end of the kitchen table. At 75, he had emerged from 30 years of hiding to become humanity's leading expert on consciousness-responsive technology, working with scientists worldwide to ensure the peaceful development of quantum awareness applications. Webb's conditioning made him immune to empathy expansion initially, Chester mused. But even he couldn't resist the field effects indefinitely. His testimony has been invaluable in identifying other consciousness suppression programs and dismantling them before they could be deployed. The house itself had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. People from around the world came to visit the location where human consciousness had first made contact with the quantum field through technological interface. But Chester had been careful to ensure that the house remained a family home first and a historical landmark second. "Dad, look at this," Lena said, pulling a small crystalline device from the inheritance box. The object was similar to the consciousness interface core, but smaller and somehow more personal. "Uncle Chester says this was made especially for me." Jonas examined the crystal, noting how it responded to Lena's touch with gentle pulses of blue light. "What does it do?" "It helps me focus my quantum awareness when I'm working with the bigger devices," Lena explained. "Uncle Chester is teaching me how to help design the next generation of consciousness interface technology, the kind that will help everyone connect to the quantum field naturally without needing the big machines." Chester smiled at his great-niece with obvious pride. "Lena's natural abilities far exceed anything I've been able to achieve with technology. She represents the future of human consciousness individuals who can access quantum awareness as easily as they can see or hear." The implications for humanity's future were staggering. Children born after the consciousness field expansion were developing quantum sensitivity naturally, without technological assistance. Scientists projected that within 2 generations, expanded awareness would become the normal state of human consciousness. Jonas picked up another item from the inheritance box, a photograph of the house, as it had looked 30 years earlier, before Chester had spent decades transforming it into a consciousness research facility. "It's hard to believe this all started with us just needing a place to live." "Everything important starts with simple needs," Chester replied. "Shelter, family, the desire to understand our place in the universe. The consciousness technology didn't create anything new, it just revealed connections that were always there, waiting for us to evolve enough to perceive them." The final item in Lena's inheritance box was a letter addressed to her in Chester's careful handwriting. She read it silently, her expression growing serious as she absorbed her great-uncle's words. "He says the technology will keep growing and changing," she told Jonas. "And someday, when I'm older, I'll need to help make decisions about how humanity uses quantum consciousness. He says it's a big responsibility, but I don't have to carry it alone because everyone who's been touched by the field expansion is connected to everyone else." Jonas felt a profound sense of peace as he watched his daughter accept the legacy Chester was passing to her. The financial struggles that had brought them to the junk house seemed like they had happened in another lifetime. The consciousness field expansion had led to technological breakthroughs that had solved energy scarcity, environmental degradation, and many of the economic problems that had once seemed insurmountable. More importantly, the expansion of human empathy and understanding had begun to address the root causes of conflict and suffering. It was becoming increasingly difficult for people to harm others when they could directly perceive the quantum connections that linked all consciousness. "Will you help me learn to use Grandma Sarah's notebook?" Lena asked, holding up the journal of her great-grandmother's early research. "Of course, sweetheart," Jonas replied. "We'll learn together, just like we learned to solve Uncle Chester's puzzles." As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of what had once been called the junk house, Jonas reflected on how loss and desperation had led them to the greatest discovery in human history. They had come to this place as refugees from a financial system that had failed them, and they had found not just shelter, but a doorway to humanity's evolutionary future. Lena carefully packed her inheritance items back into Chester's wooden box, but she kept the small consciousness interface crystal in her hand, where it continued to pulse with gentle light in response to her natural quantum awareness. Outside, the world was changing in ways that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But inside the house where it all began, 3 generations of the Calder family continued the quiet work of helping humanity understand its place in the infinite mystery of consciousness and cosmos.